Chapter 481. Go to watch net. Li Yundong looked at Sun Baidian, cupped his hands, and said with a smile, I wonder how Zhenren's son wants to fight the five elements. Sun Baidian chuckled. He walked to the table, knocked on it, and said, Zhenren Li, why don't we use this table as the arena? The two of us will show our magical powers and see who has more mysterious changes. Whoever wins will win. What do you think? Li Yundong was very curious and asked, how do you do it on this table? Sun Baidian took out 5 bags from his clothes. Each bag was about the size of a fist. Sun Baidian poured the 5 bags on the table. Everyone looked at them and saw that the 5 bags were filled with soil. However, the color of the soil in each bag was different. They were green, white, red, black, and yellow. Watch net. 7 KOM. Sun Baidian put the 5 piles of soil on the table and wiped them with his hands. The 5 piles of soil of different colors were mixed together, forming a circular 8 trigrams pattern. Zhou Qin was curious and asked Zi Yuan in confusion, Zi Yuan, what are you doing? Zi Yuan said with a serious face, I don't know either, but the 5 bags that Sun Baidian took out should contain soil from the east, west, south, north, and center. I just don't know what he's going to do by taking out the soil and arranging it into such an 8 diagrams pattern. After Sun Baidian arranged the 8 trigrams pattern, half of it was facing himself and the other half was facing Li Yundong. He said, Zhenren Li, this 8 trigrams pattern is like a battlefield between 2 sides. The yin-yang line in the middle is the battle line between our 2 sides. Why don't we use our respective divine abilities and use this 8 trigrams as a battlefield to attack each other? Whoever completely pushes the battle to the other's yin and yang points first will lose. How about it? Li Yundong looked down and saw 2 extremely conspicuous yin and yang dots on both sides of the yin-yang 8 diagrams, one black and one white. They were like 2 castles standing in the middle, staring at each other like tigers. Li Yundong laughed and said, Zhenren Sun's method is really interesting. Well, let's do as you say. As soon as Li Yundong agreed, Sun Baidian immediately burst out laughing. Good, straightforward. The cultivators in the cabin also began to whisper to each other and discuss, what kind of fight is this? Why haven't I heard of it before? That's right. How are they going to fight? Li Yundong is too bold. He dared to agree without knowing the rules. Haven't you heard of the saying the skilled are bold? Bullsh *T. How old is he? Even if he started cultivating in his mother's womb, it's impossible for him to be proficient in both thunder spells and all 5 element spells. When Su Chan and Zhou Qin saw that everyone was talking about it, they couldn't help but feel anxious for Li Yundong. Yuan Hongling looked at the field. She gently pulled Zi Yuan's sleeve and whispered, Sister Zi Yuan, do you see anything? What was the meaning of this battle of magical powers? Why don't I get it? Zi Yuan frowned slightly. She stared at the field without blinking, as if she was thinking about something. When she heard Yuan Hongling's words, she said without looking back, although I don't know how Sun Baidian is going to fight now, the 5 elements battle can't escape the principle of mutual enhancement and restraint. Sun Baidian used the 5-colored soil of the east, south, west, and middle as his city and territory. The soil itself has different attributes of the 5 directions. Yuan Hongling's eyes lit up and she said in a low voice, yes, the corresponding color of the east is cyan, which belongs to wood, the corresponding color of the west is white, which belongs to gold, the corresponding color of the south is red, which belongs to fire, the corresponding color of the north is black, which belongs to water, the corresponding color of the center is yellow, which belongs to earth. This soil is originally an earth element, but it is mixed with the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth, which greatly increases the difficulty of mutual enhancement and restraint of the 5 elements. Zi Yuan nodded slightly. Just as she was about to speak, Sun Badian suddenly cupped his hands to everyone and said, "Everyone, I invite you to watch a good show." After that, he waved his hand and gathered some of the soil in the 8 diagrams pattern in front of him into his palm. With his other hand, he quickly took out a talisman from his bosom and stuffed it into his palm. Then, he quickly blew on it. When Sun Badian opened his hand again, as soon as the soil particles in his palm fell into the 8 diagrams pattern on the round table, they immediately turned into clay figurines the size of a fingernail. These clay figurines had heads, faces, arms, and legs, as if they were living little people. When everyone saw this, they were suddenly shocked. Some cultivators suddenly stood up and said in surprise, "This is throwing soil to make soldiers." Zhou Qin was also taken aback and said, "What kind of magic is this? I've only heard of soldiers made from beans, but this is the first time I've heard of someone who can make soldiers out of soil." Zi Yuan frowned and quickly explained, "This is a talisman magic. Just now, Sun Badian must have used an earth-summoning magic. This kind of talisman must gather the spiritual qi of heaven and earth in it every day, so that it naturally has a spiritual nature. After a long time, it will catalyze everything it can come into contact with, even soil can become little people." Zhou Qin was shocked and said, "Such a magical magic? Can it turn into something else?" Zi Yuan's eyes were fixed on the field. She said, "It's not impossible, but human beings are the most intelligent of all living things. If they want to change, they will naturally change the most intelligent things. Who would change something of a lower level?" While the two of them were talking in low voices, Sun Badian suddenly waved his hand again and summoned a mahogany stool from the side. Sun Badian held the stool with both hands and exerted his strength. In an instant, the hard mahogany stool was crushed into countless small sawdust as if it were tofu. Sun Badian grabbed a handful of sawdust with one hand and muttered something in a low voice for a while. Then, with a wave of his hand, the sawdust in his hand turned into small pieces of wood of various shapes. But when everyone took a closer look, they saw that these small pieces of wood turned out to be ladders, chariots, catapults, and other siege weapons. Everyone instantly turned pale with fright, and all of them gasped in shock. To control these small sawdust into such small and sophisticated siege weapons with one's own magical power, what kind of terrifying would control magic was this? But before everyone had time to exclaim, Sun Badian laughed and waved his hand again. A bronze incense burner on the table next to him flew into his hand. He held the bronze incense burner with both hands, only to see that it seemed to be made of water. It deformed little by little, and after a while, it was kneaded into a ball of mud by him. Everyone in the cabin couldn't help but be shocked and exclaim, "Turning iron into mud." Zhou Qin had seen Chen Yunyan use the power of his Niden to compress a head-sized water ball into a thumb-sized ball. She had thought that this was an extremely terrifying kung fu and ability, but she hadn't expected that Sun Badian would be able to knead a bronze cauldron into a ball of mud as if he was kneading dough. Isn't this too terrifying? For a moment, everyone from the Fox Zen school was so shocked that they couldn't speak. Su Chan widened her eyes and looked at Sun Badian with a face full of fear. She said in a trembling voice, "What kind of cultivation is this? It's too scary, isn't it?" Zi Yuan said with an ugly expression, "Sun Badian is indeed a senior of the Gazao sect. He is also worthy of being a great cultivator who was famous in the world 20 years ago. In the past 20 years, he has disappeared without a trace. I didn't expect his cultivation to have advanced to such a level." Ruan Hongling also said with a face full of fear, "Shiji Zi Yuan, do you think he's hiding something in his palm? Otherwise, how could he knead bronze into mud with such great strength?" Zi Yuan's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes lit up and she said, "Yes, as long as there is a fire magic hidden in the palm of his hand, and fire can subdue metal. When the temperature is high, the hard metal will naturally become soft." When everyone heard this, they felt a lot more at ease and said one after another, "That must be it." Su Chan patted her chest and said with a frightened face, "I was scared to death. I thought that this person was so strong that he could knead hard bronze like it was made of mud." Zi Yuan shook her head and said, "Even if that's not the case, we can't underestimate Sun Baitian's ability. Think about it, to be able to hide a fire spell in the palm of one's hand without leaving a single trace, this in itself requires an extremely strong control over the power of fire, and one must also control this power so that it doesn't hurt oneself, especially when the bronze reaches the melting point. Not only will one not be burned when holding an object, one can also move it freely. What kind of amazing ability is this?" When everyone heard this, they couldn't help but frown and look at Li Yundong worriedly. At this time, Li Yundong couldn't help but look slightly surprised. He watched as Sun Baitian kept digging a little bit from the iron mud and then throwing it on the table. As soon as the iron mud fell on the table, it turned into weapons one after another. There were knives, spears, swords, halberds, axes, knives, forks, and everything. These little clay men quickly picked up a weapon and then lined up neatly. Every step they took made a neat roar on the table, like a real army marching, giving people a sense of pressure that could not be underestimated. Especially when they walked to the dividing line of the yin-yang pattern, a clay man at the head walked out. As soon as this clay man raised his hand, the clay soldiers behind him suddenly stopped with a rumble. They were as neat as a lion that had been through hundreds of battles. The clay man at the head raised his long sword, and then the clay soldiers behind him immediately raised their weapons with a clatter. The table seemed to have grown into a forest of steel. Although the cultivators in the yacht felt that there was a distance between them, they still felt a cold murderous aura coming at them. They were all stunned, as if an army had suddenly appeared on the table and was about to attack the city in the next second. At this time, the yacht was so quiet that even the drop of a needle could be heard. Sun Baitian looked at Li Yundong proudly and said, "Zhenrenli, let's get started, shall we?" As soon as he finished speaking, he saw the clay man at the head of the 8 diagrams on the round table suddenly slash the long sword in his hand forward. These densely packed clay men let out a loud roar and aggressively broke through the dividing line of the yin-yang 8 diagrams, rushing toward Li Yundong's stronghold. For a moment, everyone felt that the round table was a battlefield, and the clay men were warriors bathed in blood. They were like fierce beasts, roaring and pouncing forward. They were murderous, unstoppable, and invincible. Zi Yuan was shocked by the amazing momentum of these little clay men. She had never seen such a fight, and she didn't know how to deal with it. Zi Yuan widened her eyes and said, "What should we do? How should we deal with it?" Vote for recommendation. Previous page. Return to table of contents. Next page. Error report. If you like, please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 482. Go to Watch Net. Although Li Yundong had stayed in the 3,000 small worlds of the Burning Thumb Pot for many years, had read almost all the classics of Buddhism and Taoism, and had learned almost all the magic, he had rarely used these magic in actual combat, especially in an incredible fight like the one in front of him. In the face of the swarming clay soldiers, Li Yundong was shocked and quickly began to cast magic. Go to Watch Net. 7 KOM. Li Yundong pointed his finger at the table, and soon the mud particles on the yin and yang boundary kept jumping. Each grain of mud was constantly expanding, and soon a high wall was formed, blocking the way of these clay soldiers. However, these clay soldiers were not discouraged at all when they hit the hard wall. They quickly separated into a line, and the clay soldiers behind them pushed the siege vehicles made by Sun Baitian's magic up one by one. These clay soldiers were either in groups of 30 or 50, surrounding a mud chariot, or more than a dozen people carrying ladders one after another, pouncing on the wall like ants. Li Yundong saw that although these clay soldiers were blocked by the wall for a while, they controlled the siege weapons and kept attacking the wall fiercely. Every time the chariot hit the wall, there would be a low rumble, and the wall would also emit a faint yellow light. Li Yundong looked at the table with a frown. He knew that this wall alone could not stop these clay soldiers from moving forward. It was already on the verge of collapse under the fierce impact of the siege vehicles controlled by the clay soldiers. In particular, some small clay men climbing the ladders had already climbed up the wall and began to jump down like dumplings. Li Yundong saw that more and more clay soldiers had climbed over the wall, and more cracks had gradually appeared in the wall he had built. His brows furrowed tighter and tighter. Seeing that these clay soldiers were about to rush to his stronghold, he suddenly had the urge to slap them into mud pancakes. Sun Beitian, who was opposite Li Yundong, seemed to have noticed Li Yundong's thoughts. He chuckled and said, "Zhenrenli, we can't fight directly. We can only use magic to fight with the 5 elements. Otherwise, it will be considered cheating and we will lose." Li Yundong quickly raised his eyes to look at Sun Beitian. He smiled slightly and lowered his eyes again. His mind was racing as he tried to think of a solution. Li Yundong thought to himself, this clay figurine is originally an earth magic, and wood restrains earth, so should I use wood magic to deal with it? Thinking of this, Li Yundong quickly mobilized his liver qi. The liver was of the wood attribute. As soon as he mobilized his liver qi, his face turned a little green. He pointed his finger at the table, and countless tiny vines quickly grew on the table, binding the little clay figures in place one by one. At this time, the people who were watching the battle had already left their original positions and gathered around the round table, watching this eye-opening battle attentively. Su Chan and the others clenched their fists anxiously and looked up at the table. They wished they could rush up and help. Seeing that Li Yundong had used wood magic to trap the clay soldiers in place, they couldn't help cheering in unison. But as soon as they shouted, they saw the clay soldiers quickly waving the weapons in their hands and looking at the wooden vines entangling their bodies. In just 2 or 3 moves, they had cut the wooden vines clean, and then rushed forward quickly. Li Yundong was slightly shocked. He hadn't expected that the weapons in the hands of these clay figurines would have such a magical effect. While he was stunned, he saw that the clay soldiers had already rushed to his stronghold. Seeing that he was about to lose, Li Yundong suddenly heard Zi Yuan's voice transmission saying, "Li Yundong, blindly restraining the 5 elements is not enough. Sun Beitian originally used the earth of the 5 directions. Although these clay soldiers themselves are of the earth attribute is mixed with the other 5 elements. Moreover, the weapons in the clay soldiers' hands are of the gold attribute. Gold restrains wood, so it naturally restrains your wood magic. You have to find a way to deal with these clay soldiers with the help of the 5 elements. Otherwise, you can't deal with them with just one magic." Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He first quickly mobilized the earth magic and built a thick and tall earth wall around his stronghold. Although this earth wall was only as high as his forearm, it was already an insurmountable wall for these clay soldiers the size of a fingernail. After blocking the attack of the clay soldiers, Li Yundong temporarily took a breath and began to carefully think about what Zi Yuan had said before. He thought to himself, Zi Yuan is right. In theory, Sun Beitian is attacking me with 3 kinds of magic, earth, gold, and wood. How can I resist him with only earth and wood? I have to mix the 5 kinds of magic together. Li Yundong saw that after these clay soldiers met the wall he had built with earth magic, they were ready to use the same trick again. They used siege weapons and ladders, trying to break through the wall at the same time. Li Yundong saw that the wall was shaking again and again under the fierce attack of the siege vehicles. He thought to himself, is there any way to make this wall impenetrable? Thinking of this, Li Yundong suddenly had an idea. He thought, among the 5 elements, fire gives birth to earth. If I use fire to urge earth, I think the earth magic will be even more powerful. Li Yundong's mind was working fast. He rubbed his fingers together, and a burning fireball appeared on his fingertips. Most of the cultivators around him were discerning. As soon as they saw Li Yundong's movements, they had already guessed what he was going to do. Immediately, a cultivator nodded secretly and said in a low voice, "Yes, using fire to urge earth can make your own city wall more stable. Moreover, fire can restrain gold, and it can also restrain the gold weapons in the hands of the clay men." But there were also cultivators who sneered and said, "Don't be silly. Sun Baitian's clay men are also of the earth element. Once you use fire, they will also become stronger." Su Chan saw that the area of Li Yundong's territory on the round table had been reduced to a very small area. Sun Baitian's army had already arrived at the city and surrounded the stronghold. The little girl couldn't help but feel anxious, but she couldn't do anything to help. She could only stare at the small war on the round table like the others. Seeing that Li Yundong was going to use fire magic to deal with him, Sun Baitian smiled and waved his hands, summoning a water ball on the teacup next to him. As soon as Li Yundong released the fire magic, he would use water magic to restrain Li Yundong's magic. Seeing Sun Baitian's movements, Li Yundong smiled slightly and waved his other hand in the air, summoning all the tea in the teacup in front of him into his palm. He held a fireball in one hand and a water ball in the other. There was a thoughtful and focused expression on his face. Obviously, this battle was no longer simply about who had stronger spiritual power and who was more proficient in the 5 elements of magic. It was more about wisdom and strategy. Everyone saw that Li Yundong could control both water and fire magic freely. Before they had time to marvel in their hearts, they saw Li Yundong suddenly throw the water ball in his hand onto the table. With a crash, the table seemed to have turned into a swamp, and all the clay soldiers were soaked in the water. Sun Baitian frowned and threw the water ball in his hand into the air. At the same time, he quickly summoned a ball of fire with one hand and quickly took out a talisman with the word Earth written on it with the other. He threw the fireball and the talisman at the clay men on the table at the same time. The clay men were strengthened by the earth magic and stimulated by the fire magic. Suddenly, their bodies grew larger, from the size of a pinky nail to the size of a thumb. These clay figurines were originally covered in water above their heads. Now, they could only reach their waists in the water. With a shout, they quickly dug up the soil on the table with the weapons in their hands. In just a short while, they dug out one river after another, and the water on the table flowed obediently down the river. The surrounding cultivators nodded one after another and said, "Li Yundong clearly knows that earth restrains water, but he still used water to wash it. Isn't he asking for trouble?" But as soon as they finished speaking, they saw Li Yundong quickly throw the fireball in his hand at the mud wall. The mud wall suddenly burst into a blazing flame with a bang. In the burning flame, the mud wall seemed to have a life of its own and kept growing taller and taller. It had grown from the height of a forearm to the height of an arm and the thickness of a palm. For an adult, this was just a mud castle like a child's house, but for a clay man the size of a thumb, it was already an almost indestructible super fortress. Only then did everyone understand that Li Yundong had deliberately used water to attack the other side in order to attract Sun Baitian's attention. At the same time, he had used fire to make the wall taller and thicker. This was a tactic of diversion. Sun Baitian frowned secretly. He quickly glanced at Li Yundong, snorted, and said, "Zhenrenli, you can use fire, but I can't." After saying that, he rubbed his hands together, and the palms of his hands were ignited with blazing flames. With a wave of his hand, he threw the flames in his hands toward the dense clay soldiers on the table. But as soon as he moved, Li Yundong quickly chuckled. He raised his hand, and the tea in the teacup in the cabin of the cruise ship automatically jumped up. Like a high-pressure water column, it rushed toward the flame thrown by Sun Badian and scattered it in an instant. Sun Badian frowned. He was unwilling to give up and mobilized wood magic again. Once again, he created a siege weapon several times larger than before and launched an attack on Li Yundong's stronghold. Li Yundong also reacted accordingly. He mobilized gold magic and imitated Sun Baitian's method of kneading a bronze incense burner into iron mud. Then, he threw the iron mud around his stronghold. As soon as the iron mud fell on the table, it immediately turned into a strict iron wall, as if the stronghold was covered with a layer of hard armor. Without saying a word, Sun Badian immediately mobilized fire magic again and burned it toward the hard metal armor outside Li Yundong's stronghold. Li Yundong also immediately called water to extinguish the fire. But this time, before Sun Baitian's fire met the water, he suddenly controlled all the clay men on the table to throw all the wood siege weapons into the fire. This time, wood gave birth to fire, and the flames became extremely strong. Although water could restrain fire, because the water was too weak, Li Yundong couldn't resist it for a while, and the flames burned the metal wall. As soon as the metal wall was burned by the fire, it immediately turned red, and there were signs of softening and collapsing. Seeing the opportunity, Li Yundong immediately removed the iron wall and led the fire to his stronghold. As soon as his stronghold was burned by the fire gave birth to earth, which once again helped Li Yundong's stronghold, making it taller and stronger. At this time, the people in the cabin saw Li Yundong and Sun Badian fighting back and forth, dealing with each other's moves. Their speed was so fast that it was dizzying. In particular, the round table was like a battlefield. It was really like a small battle, making some cultivators who didn't have time to think only feel like they were watching a magic movie. It was as if they were there, watching to their heart's content and cheering. As the saying goes, the layman watches the fun, while the expert watches the artistry. Some cultivators only felt that the battle was very lively, but they couldn't keep up with the changes of the two people to think. Some cultivators could faintly see that Li Yundong and Sun Badian were racking their brains to use the 5 elements magic to constantly attack and defend. In particular, the two of them used the 5 elements magic without thinking, not only showing their superb control skills of the 5 elements, but also their superior reaction and wisdom. Especially in the face of Sun Baitian's aggressive attack, Li Yundong, who was at an absolute disadvantage at the beginning, slowly gained a foothold. Although he was facing a bad situation where the army was pressing on, he calmly dealt with it and thwarted Sun Baitian's attacks one after another. Not only did he stabilize his position, but he was also temporarily invincible. The cultivators in the field saw this and secretly admired him. They couldn't help thinking, if I were Li Yundong, would I be able to block Sun Baitian's attack, which was like a raging tide? Chapter 483. Go to Watch Network. Although Zhang Ling of the Zhengyi school looked down on the Gazao sect and secretly regarded Li Yundong as a thorn in her side, she couldn't help but sigh to Zhou Ping when she saw this scene. During the Warring States period, the king of Chu summoned Liu Ban and built a large number of siege weapons to attack the Song dynasty. When Moz heard the news, he traveled thousands of miles to the Chu kingdom and launched a siege battle with Liu Ban. In that battle, Moz used his belt as a city wall and launched an offensive and defensive demonstration against Liu Ban. As a result, Liu Ban changed the siege technique 9 times, but Moz easily resolved it. I didn't expect that after more than 2,000 years, this offensive and defensive battle would reappear in such a form in front of us today. What an anomaly! Zhou Ping looked at Li Yundong with an extremely complicated gaze. She said indignantly in her heart, "Master, how could Li Yundong have cultivated for such a short period of time? How could he use so many magic arts? His thunder magic is so powerful, but why is he so proficient in the 5 elements magic?" Zhang Ling also looked at Li Yundong and shook her head slightly. She said in a low voice, "This boy must have had some kind of adventure again. Otherwise, it would be impossible for his magic cultivation to improve so quickly in such a short period of time. Zhou Ping glanced worriedly at Zhang Tianhe, who was standing next to her with a serious face. She whispered to Zhang Ling, "Master, then shitty." Although Zhang Ling didn't like Li Yundong very much, she was also a rare great cultivator in the cultivation world, so she naturally knew what was good and what was bad. It was impossible for her to forcibly describe a short person as tall and a tall person as short in front of her disciple. Zhang Ling frowned slightly and shook her head at Zhou Ping, motioning for her to stop talking. Zhou Ping immediately shut her mouth. She knew that even her master was not optimistic about Zhang Tianhe's ability to compete with Li Yundong. Zhou Ping gritted her teeth and said, "Shidi has been working hard to cultivate since he was humiliated and returned to the mountain last time. This time, his cultivation has improved greatly. He wanted to avenge his previous humiliation, but he didn't expect Li Yundong to improve even faster. I really don't know how sad he should be." Zhou Ping looked at Zhang Tianhe worriedly, but Zhang Tianhe stared at the field as if he didn't feel anything. His body trembled slightly, and he unconsciously clenched his fists. Although his face was expressionless, his eyes revealed strong jealousy and unwillingness. Just as the people outside were engrossed in this rare and wonderful battle, a small sparrow suddenly landed on the skylight of the yacht. This small sparrow stuck its head out and looked inside the skylight. After a while, a paper crane landed next to this sparrow. The paper crane and the sparrow stared at each other for a while, then turned their heads in unison and continued to look into the cabin. At this time, the battle in the cabin had become white-hot. Li Yundong began to change from defense to offense. He was becoming more and more proficient in the control of the five elements, and his understanding of the mutual promotion and restraint of the five elements was becoming deeper and deeper. At this time, the round table was no longer the scene of a dense group of clay soldiers attacking the city. Li Yundong's stronghold had become an impregnable stronghold. Under Sun Baitian's fierce attack, not only was the stronghold not weakened, but it had also become stronger and taller because of Li Yundong's ingenious use of force. However, Li Yundong's stronghold had become taller and larger, and Sun Baitian had no choice but to upgrade his clay soldiers and weapons. The clay soldiers, which had been the size of a fingernail, had gradually become the size of a baby's fist. The cultivators watching even had an illusion that if the two of them continued to fight like this, sooner or later, the stronghold in front of Li Yundong would become a real ultimate stronghold, and sooner or later, Sun Baitian's clay soldiers would also become human-sized clay soldiers. While Sun Baitian was attacking the stronghold, Li Yundong also began to build his own army and began to attack Sun Baitian's stronghold. Everyone saw that Li Yundong was mobilizing his Jinqi to fight against Sun Baitian with all his might. For a moment, the clay soldiers on the table were fighting each other. On top of them, the five elements of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth were flying everywhere. One moment, Li Yundong had gained the upper hand in one battlefield, and the next moment, Sun Baitian had turned the tables on another battlefield. The two of them seemed to be fighting on a sand table battlefield. At this time, Li Yundong's Jinqi had reached its peak state. Although his face looked normal, white steam was rising from the top of his head. Sun Baitian's face changed from red to green, and the colors changed back and forth, like a chameleon. Sun Baitian saw that Li Yundong's stronghold was becoming stronger and stronger, while his own side had been attacking for a long time. His Jinqi was already a little weak, but his opponent, Li Yundong, was still full of divine light. His eyes were bright and unfathomable, as if he still had a lot of strength left. Sun Baitian was secretly shocked and thought to himself, "I've cultivated for decades, but I've never seen anyone with such a powerful and long aura. What's more, this person is so young. How did he cultivate? What's more, he is the leader of the Fox Zen school. I heard that this person has a bad reputation and is a lustful person. But how could a lustful person have such a powerful and majestic aura? Sun Badian was secretly shocked. He gritted his teeth and tried his best to hold on, but the momentum of the previous fierce attack was too strong and had consumed a lot of Zhenqi. At this time, Li Yundong commanded his army to attack. It was really like a fierce beast coming out of its cage, like a flood opening the floodgates. In an instant, the battle line rushed back to the boundary between Yin and Yang, and his clay soldiers were beaten back again and again. At this time, the sharp-eyed cultivators knew that Sun Badian was already an arrow at the end of its flight and could no longer hold on under Li Yundong's tide-like attacks. They shook their heads and sighed to themselves, "It's a pity that Sun Badian lost like this. I don't know who this Li Yundong is. Even his 5 elements magic is so powerful that he can defeat Sun Badian, who came prepared. Terrible, it's really terrible." But just as they were sighing, Li Yundong's troops and Sun Badian's troops were fighting and colliding in the middle of the round table. Suddenly, the round table could not bear the heavy burden. With a crack, it broke into 2 pieces and fell in each of the 2 men's directions. Li Yundong and Sun Badian were stunned at the same time. They looked at each other and did not speak for a while. Li Yundong looked at Sun Badian, as if asking him if he wanted to continue. However, Sun Badian seemed to not see Li Yundong's gaze. He just glanced at him and quickly withdrew his gaze, trying to adjust his breathing. Everyone saw that Sun Badian was sweating profusely at this time, as if he had just been fished out of a water tank. Although Li Yundong was a little out of breath, his face was very normal, and there was not a drop of sweat on his body. When the 2 of them compared, it was obvious who was superior. Wang Zhenyuan frowned secretly when he saw the result of the battle. Soon, he had an idea and burst into laughter and applauded. "Wonderful, it's really wonderful." At this time, the crowd on the scene seemed to have woken up from a dream, and they burst into cheers and applause. Although this battle of magical powers was not as earth-shattering as the previous one, this battle of magical powers not only compared the 2's cultivation and understanding of the 5 elements, but also compared the 2's strategies and intelligence. This battle of magical powers was not only a live battle of offense and defense, but it was also the perfect application of military strategy in a battle of magical powers. Everyone couldn't help but be convinced by this. Just as the crowd was cheering deafeningly, the sparrow, who had been watching the scene from the skylight, suddenly spread its wings and flew up. It flapped its wings and flew into the sky. After flying in one direction for a while, it finally landed in the palm of an old man. This old man was wearing a black kimono and a pair of wooden clogs. He was Master Xinyan of the Rigoino Zhenyan Tantrism in Japan, whom Li Yundong had met once in Shiyuan Temple. The old man gently stroked the sparrow in the palm of his hand with his wrinkled hand. He sighed softly and said, "Alas, I didn't expect that China, which claims to be the great China and the heavenly kingdom, would degenerate to such an extent. So many cultivators had actually been reduced to acrobatics. Sad, lamentable." Standing next to him was Shinsu, who had confronted Li Yundong before. The young monk was still wearing a famous brand suit and standing humbly behind a little girl. After hearing Master Xinyan's words, he said, "Master Xinyan, you worry too much. These cultivators have to fight secretly. How can they have any real ability?" Tachibana Wakako, who was wearing a red kimono with white flowers, looked like a cute doll. She looked up at Xinyan and said with a smile, "But Master Xinyan, I think their battle just now was very interesting." Xinyan shook his head and sighed. "Tachibana Wakako, after all, you are still a child, so you will find it interesting. In my opinion, what happened just now was simply a farce. In our Japanese cultivation world, this is simply incredible. A battle is a battle. This is a sacred and solemn matter. How can it be treated as a joke? In our cultivation world, a battle is a battle. If you don't win, you will die." Tachibana Wakako blinked her eyes as if she understood and asked naively, "Master Xinyan, do we still want to go to their Taoist assembly?" Xinyan thought for a moment and hesitated. While he was hesitating, he heard Xinxiu say, Master Xinyan, please allow me to go to the Taoist assembly and fight with Li Yundong. It will also let these Chinese cultivators know what a real battle is. Xinyan shook his head without thinking and said, No, we're not here to cause trouble this time. Xinxiu was greatly disappointed, but he didn't say anything more. He lowered his head obediently and stood respectfully behind Tachibana Wakako like a servant, not saying another word. However, Tachibana Wakako was a little unwilling. She pulled on Xinyan's sleeve and kept begging, Master Xinyan, it's not easy for me to come out, and I happen to run into such a fun Taoist assembly. Let me go and have a look. I beg you, I beg you. Xinyan looked at Tachibana Wakako lovingly. He thought about it carefully and smiled helplessly. Well, Tachibana Wakako, I really can't do anything to you. When Tachibana Wakako heard this, she was overjoyed and cheered, Hooray! Master Xinyan is the best. Don't worry, I will be very obedient and won't cause any trouble. Hearing this, Xinyan put his hands in his sleeves and said proudly, So what if you cause trouble? How can these cultivators, who treat fighting as children's games, be worthy of being our opponents? After that, he burst out laughing. His laughter was like thunder, startling the little sparrow in his hand and causing it to fly away into the distance. I'm sorry, but because I don't have any manuscripts, the update time has become very unstable. I hope you can understand. In addition, there's no need to join groups 1 to 13. They're all full. If you want to join, please join group 14, 143153640. I can't guarantee when group 14 will be full. If you want to join, hurry up. Chapter 484. Go to watch net. When Xinyan, Xinxiu, and Tachibana Wakako decided to go to the Taoist assembly, Li Yundong, who was on the yacht, had already become the target of public criticism. Go to watch net. Although there had only been 2 rounds of fighting, the strength Li Yundong had shown was enough to make the cultivators of all sects deeply afraid. Since ancient times, there had been no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts. Who wouldn't be jealous of the person who occupied the first place? Who wouldn't want to pull the first place down and climb up to it themselves? Dang Chong of the Penglai sect shook his head and said loudly, Jinren son, what a good battle. I've lived for so many years, and it's the first time I've seen such a unique battle. It's wonderful, really wonderful. However, although this battle is wonderful, there should always be a winner. Who won just now? This question hit the hearts of everyone. Putting aside the brilliance of the battle just now, everyone's selfishness suddenly became heavy again. They thought to themselves, a great cultivator who is proficient in thunder magic and the 5 elements of magic is simply a great cultivator. Moreover, the most frightening thing is that he is still so young. If he continues to be so arrogant, how can I stand up for myself? Ding Nan looked at Li Yundong in shock. She unconsciously stammered, he's too strong. How could he be so strong? Zheng Yuan's face was gloomy, and his vigilance toward Li Yundong had been raised to the peak. It was the first time he had felt so strongly that a person was such a huge and terrible threat to him. This kind of vigilance and nervousness made him not even notice the strong admiration in Ding Nan's tone. He thought that his disciple LV Fengping was groaning in despair because she couldn't take revenge. There was a trace of coldness in Zheng Yuan's eyes. He thought to himself, no, I can't let this guy get the immortal pen. Otherwise, although the world is big, there will be no place for our sects. He glanced around and saw that the cultivators of all sects were looking at Li Yundong with complicated expressions, their eyes full of jealousy. His heart skipped a beat, and a smile appeared on his face. He said to a cultivator of the Shenshao sect beside him in a tone of praise and appreciation, 500 years ago, Jinren Zhang, and 500 years later, Jinren Li. Good. I really didn't expect our cultivation world to produce such a great cultivator, and he's so young. Amazing, really amazing. When the cultivators next to him heard this, they couldn't help but look at Zheng Yuan, as if to distinguish whether he was sincerely praising him or not. An older cultivator of the Shenshao sect snorted and said with some dissatisfaction, Zhang Sanfeng is indeed a great Jinren, but I don't know if Li Yundong is a great Jinren or not, but he can't be considered a great Jinren now. He's too young. When Zheng Yuan saw that there were indeed some cultivators around him who were not convinced and angry, he was delighted. He continued to fan the flames and said, "That's not true. As the saying goes, heroes come from young people since ancient times. With such a young man, us old bones can rest assured." This older cultivator was the elder cultivator of the Shenshao sect. His name was Lu Yuqing. In terms of seniority, he was the same as Sun Beidian. He was also a great cultivator who lived in seclusion. This time, he had brought his disciples to participate in the Taoist assembly. Originally, he wanted to show off, but he hadn't expected to be shocked by Li Yundong before he even got on the stage. When Lu Yuqing heard this, he frowned and looked at Zheng Yuan with an unfriendly look. He said gloomily, "Leader Zheng, what do you mean by that?" Zheng Yuan stroked his beard and said with a smile, "Jinren Lu, don't you think so? Cultivators these days cultivate too quickly. We are old. We can't catch up. In a few years, it will be their world." Although Zheng Yuan's voice was not loud, almost everyone on the yacht heard him. Su Chan and Wan Hongling had confronted Zheng Yuan face to face before, so they knew that this kind-looking old man was a villain with a vicious heart and a dagger hidden in his smile. Seeing that Zheng Yuan was praising Li Yundong like this, they immediately looked at each other. Wan Hongling asked curiously, "What's this old thing thinking? Why is he praising Li Yundong like this?" Su Chan also blinked and looked at Zheng Yuan with a puzzled expression. Could it be that he sees that Yundong is too powerful, so he wants to make peace with us? Wan Hongling sneered and said, "Humph, this man is full of evil water. If you ask me, he must be up to something. How can he have good intentions? I don't believe it." Zi Yuan saw that Wan Hongling's words were so unscrupulous and loud that they attracted the attention of the cultivators from the sects next to them. She frowned and gently stepped on Wan Hongling's foot under the table. Wan Hongling felt the pain in her toes and quickly shrank her feet. She looked at Zi Yuan with dissatisfaction and snorted twice, but in the end, she didn't say anything more unpleasant. Zi Yuan was a calm and low-key person, so she didn't want to cause trouble. However, Zhou Qin had just reached the Zhuji phase, so she was full of spirit. After hearing Wan Hongling and Su Chan's words, she thought for a moment and sneered. This is a trick of praising Li Yundong openly and secretly. Zheng Yuan wants to incite the other sects to have a common hatred for Li Yundong and then attack him together. When Su Chan and the others heard this, they couldn't help but look at the cultivators of the other sections. Sure enough, they saw many meaningful gazes in everyone's eyes. There was no lack of jealousy in them. They were shocked and said angrily, "It must be like this. Damn it, it's shameful." Su Chan asked anxiously, "Sister Zi Yuan, what should we do now?" Zi Yuan pondered for a while, then said in a low voice, "It's better to let Li Yundong admit defeat or a draw. It's really not worth offending all the sects in the cultivation world for the sake of the immortal pen." But as soon as she finished speaking, Wan Hongling and Zhou Qin blurted out at the same time, "No." Wan Hongling said anxiously, "Shiji Zi Yuan, what nonsense are you talking about? This is the Taoist assembly, which is held once every 4 years. Do you think you can give up just because you say so?" Zhou Qin also raised her eyebrows and said, "Zi Yuan, I don't agree with you. Does a person who is too strong have to try to cover up his own light and strength? How can there be such a reason in the world?" Ziyuan shook her head slightly and said with a wry smile, "You don't know. My master Wang Yuanshan. He was like this when he was young. His strength was too outstanding, and he didn't know how to restrain himself when he was young. As a result, he was rejected wherever he went, so no one wanted to get close to him and everyone said bad things about him." Su Chan was slightly shocked. She quickly thought, it turns out that Wang Yuanshan is such a person. Isn't my master the same? He is eccentric and arrogant. No wonder the two of them fell in love at first sight. It turns out to be like this. Yundong can't become like this. I don't want him to become like this. Thinking of this, the little girl suddenly whispered tentatively, "Why don't we let Yundong admit defeat? Anyway, this battle does look like a draw." Although Zhou Qin was aggressive, she was also a very sensible person. She hesitated for a moment and said, "I don't know what master thinks." While they were talking in private, Wan Zhenyuan smiled and cupped his hands to Li Yundong and Sun Beidian, saying, "Zhenren Sun, Zhenren Li, in my opinion, this battle is a draw. What do you think?" When Sun Beidian, who was adjusting his qi, heard this, he quickly glanced at Wan Zhenyuan and blushed. He knew in his heart that the leader was protecting his face and wanted to give him a draw. Otherwise, if word got out that he, an old cultivator who had cultivated the 5 elements magic for decades, could not defeat a young man who had only cultivated for half a year, how could he bear it? How could he face others? The cultivators of the other sects were also well aware of this. Many cultivators were unwilling to see Li Yundong win 2 games in a row, so most of them were silent about this. Du Fei and the others wanted to say a few words of fairness, but they swallowed their words because they were afraid of offending more of their fellow cultivators. Only Dang Chang jumped up and shook his head loudly. "No, no." When Wan Zhenyuan heard him speak, he frowned, but he quickly relaxed and said with a smile, "Dang Chang, what's your opinion?" Dang Chang said loudly, "In my opinion, Sun Beidian, Zhenren Sun, won this round." When everyone heard this, they were immediately surprised and looked at Dang Chang. Wan Zhenyuan was also stunned. He hadn't expected that Dang Chang would speak up for him. He was overjoyed and said with a fake smile, "Zhenren Dang, what do you mean by that?" Although Sun Baitian's expression was a little unnatural, he still looked at Dang Chang curiously. He wanted to see what kind of wise opinion this guy, who liked to joke around, was going to say. Dang Chang pointed at Sun Beidian proudly and said, "Look, Zhenren Sun is sweating all over, but Zhenren Li doesn't have a drop of sweat." Just now, Zhenren Sun adjusted his qi for a long time and didn't dare to say a word, but Zhenren Li's qi was calm. In comparison, didn't Sun Beidian win? When everyone heard this, they thought, "Oh my god, this guy is saying the opposite." Sun Baitian's face turned blue when he heard this, and he was so angry that his whole body was trembling. Wan Zhenyuan's face also turned purple. He shouted angrily, "Dang Chang, you've gone too far. You have no respect for your elders." Dang Chang opened his mouth wide and said with a blank face, "What's wrong with me? Am I wrong?" Wan Zhenyuan was furious, but he couldn't point out Dang Chang's words clearly. Otherwise, he would directly admit that Sun Beidian had lost. In a hurry, he shouted angrily, What do you mean by that?" Dang Chang said with an aggrieved and innocent face, "Didn't you just decide who would win by working the hardest? I saw that Zhenren Sun's forehead was full of sweat. Obviously, he worked the hardest." Everyone immediately burst out laughing. Wei Qing, who was eager to see the world in chaos, also said in a low voice, "Then isn't the brick hauler the best in the world?" Du Fei held back his laughter, glared at her, and shouted in a low voice, "Shut up, don't talk nonsense." Ruan Hongling, who was sitting not far from them, heard this and said in a strange tone, "Nonsense, the coal digger is the best." After that, everyone burst into laughter. When cultivators fought, the most important thing was to be unrestrained, calm, and free. The more powerful a cultivator was, the more ethereal he would be when he used magic, just like an immortal. In their opinion, only people with low levels would be in such a sorry state. Dang Chong's words were like a slap in Sun Baitian's face. Sun Baitian snorted angrily and stamped his foot, causing the yacht to tremble. He turned around and rushed out. Wang Zhenyuan was very anxious and quickly chased after him. Sherbua, Sherbua. But no matter how he shouted, Sun Baitian covered his face with his sleeves and left quickly, refusing to look back. Wang Zhenyuan gritted his teeth with hatred. A murderous look flashed in his eyes, and his face suddenly became extremely sinister and ferocious. But when he turned around again, Wang Zhenyuan's face became calm again. He laughed and said, Sherbua left first. Zhenrenli won the previous battle. Hearing this, Zhou Qin and the others sneered in their hearts. If you win, you win. What do you mean by that? Wang Zhenyuan smiled and cupped his hands to Li Yundong, saying, Zhenrenli, congratulations on winning another round. Are you ready for the next one? Li Yundong had been standing there with a smile on his face. In the face of the various gazes and private discussions of the crowd, he was like a mountain that had been brushed by a breeze. His emotions did not fluctuate at all. He cupped his hands to Wang Zhenyuan and said with a smile, I'm ready, Master Wan. But who will be the next one? Everyone looked at each other for a while and thought to themselves, even Sun Baitian has lost. Can I guarantee that I will win if I go up? For a moment, there was silence in the yacht. Only Zheng Yuan shook his head and sighed softly. Zhenrenli is really young and vigorous. No matter what, he will consume a lot of Zhenqi in 2 consecutive battles. He doesn't know how to rest well before going up. Alas! Although his words seemed to be a kind reminder, everyone's heart skipped a beat when they heard it. Yes, Li Yundong has fought 2 battles in a row. No matter how powerful he is, he must have consumed a lot of Zhenqi. If we go up at this time, won't we get a big advantage? Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others couldn't help but be furious when they heard this. They said in unison, Zheng Yuan is hateful. Su Chan said anxiously, Zheng Yuan is up to no good. He's inciting everyone to exhaust Yundong to death. Zi Yuan frowned and said, that's right, but I don't know if anyone will come out to be cannon fodder. As soon as she finished speaking, an elder of the Shenshao sect stood up and said in a clear voice, I'm Lu Yuqing of the Shenshao sect. Zhenrenli, shall we have a fight? Su Chan was shocked. Is there really someone who wants to be cannon fodder? Ruan Hongling sneered and said, you think that he is cannon fodder, but he thinks that he might get a big advantage. It doesn't matter if he loses. Anyway, Chen Yunyan and Sun Baitian have already lost, so there's nothing to be embarrassed about. But if he wins, he will earn back everything. When the girls heard this, they all gritted their teeth and cursed. Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, saw that Li Yundong was smiling and was about to make an obeisance. Suddenly, an impulse surged in her heart. She stood up abruptly and said loudly, I'll do it this time. Her voice was loud and sudden, instantly attracting everyone's attention, and they all turned to look at her. Lu Yuqing looked her up and down and frowned. Who are you? Why are you here? Zhou Qin took a deep breath, calmed down, and cupped her hands in a clear voice. As the saying goes, when the master needs something, the disciple will do it for him. Lu Yuqing was slightly surprised and said, Are you Li Yundong's disciple? Zhou Qin said loudly, Yes, I am Li Yundong's first disciple, Zhou Qin. It's even later. I just finished writing a chapter, and there will be another chapter in the evening, but it may be a little late. I don't know the specific time. Don't wait, everyone. Get up in the morning and read it. In addition, Group 14 is full. Wipe your sweat. Don't join it. I just opened a supergroup of 500 people, 28092211. Everyone, please join it. If the group of 200 people is full in one day, then the group of 500 people can at least last for 2 days, right? Thank you to group owner Gio for providing a supergroup of 500 people. Chapter 485. Go to watch net. Zhou Qin's words made the cabin suddenly quiet down. The cultivators of all sects looked at Zhou Qin strangely. Lu Yuqing even raised his head and laughed out loud. The young cultivators of the Shenshao sect who were accompanying him also let out a burst of mocking laughter. Go to watch net. 7 KOM. Lu Yuqing chuckled and didn't say anything. A disciple of the Shenshao sect next to him said loudly, "You're so shameless. How can you claim to be the first disciple of the sect?" Lu Yuqing chuckled and did not say anything. A disciple of the Shenshao sect next to him said loudly, "How shameless. How can anyone claim to be the first disciple of the sect? Li Yundong is just a small leader of the Fox Zen school. How dare you claim to be the first disciple of the sect? What kind of sect are you running?" After that, they burst into laughter again. At this time, the cultivators of the other sects on the yacht also made fun of Zhou Qin's misfortune and pointed their fingers at her. Li Yundong saw Zhou Qin standing where she was, her face flushed and her body trembling slightly with anger. He walked over to Zhou Qin, patted her on the shoulder, and whispered, "Zhou Qin, we cultivators need to cultivate ourselves. We need to pay attention to controlling our emotions and temper. Forget it, I'll be fine. You." But before Li Yundong could finish his words, Zhou Qin acted as if she hadn't heard him. She suddenly took a step forward, pointed at Lu Yuqing, and shouted excitedly, "Don't talk so much nonsense. Do you dare to fight?" Li Yundong was stunned and looked at his classmate and proud disciple in confusion. He didn't understand why Zhou Qin, who had always been very obedient to him, suddenly lost control of her emotions and turned a deaf ear to his words. Li Yundong was about to speak, but he suddenly felt a hand gently pinching his fingertips. He turned his head and saw Zi Yuan shaking her head slightly at him. Although Li Yundong was puzzled, he swallowed what he had said to Zhou Qin out of trust in Zi Yuan. Li Yundong didn't know that Zhou Qin could tolerate others' contempt and mockery of her, but she absolutely couldn't tolerate others' contempt and mockery of Li Yundong. In the face of Zhou Qin's challenge, Lu Yuqing's eyes showed a touch of disdain and sarcasm, but he did not lose his mind because of it. He knew that even if he won against Zhou Qin, there would be no benefits. On the contrary, he would be notorious for bullying the weak, and a man bullying a woman. Lu Yuqing snorted, sneered, turned his face away, and looked at Wang Zhenyuan. Li cupped his hands and said, "Master Wan, according to convention, can you send your own disciples to participate in the battle for you?" Wan glanced at Zhou Qin and said with a smile, "Wang Zhenyuan. According to the rules of the Taoist assembly, the disciple can take on a battle for the master, but the outcome must also be counted. If the disciple loses, it will be regarded as the master's loss, and from then on, he will be disqualified from participating in the competition for the treasure. According to the rules of the Taoist assembly, it doesn't matter if I lose, but if I cause Li Yundong to lose the right to participate in the competition, it will be a big crime." Li Yundong saw Zhou Qin looking at him, and his heart suddenly tightened. He knew that Zhou Qin had lost her confidence in winning and her aggressive spirit. She began to look forward and backward, worried about personal gains and losses. When Li Yundong saw Zhou Qin looking at him, his heart suddenly tightened and he knew that it was not good, because he knew that at this time, Zhou Qin had lost the confidence to win and the aggressive spirit from before. She began to look forward and backward, worrying about personal gains and losses. Once they fell into it, if they accepted the challenge, it would be fine if they won, but if they lost, they would fall into endless self-blame and regret, which was extremely disadvantageous to their cultivation. It could even be said that if they didn't have great opportunities and great determination, they would basically become second-rate cultivators, no matter how excellent their talent was. Moreover, once they were caught in it, it would be fine if they won, but if they lost, they would fall into endless self-blame and regret. It was extremely detrimental to their cultivation. It could even be said that without great opportunities and great determination, a cultivator would basically be reduced to a second-rate cultivator no matter how talented they were. Moreover, if Zhou Qin did not accept the challenge, then her Taoist heart would be broken, because no matter when she cultivated in the future, as long as she thought of what had happened today, she would regret retreating at the last minute and fall into a demonic barrier from then on. Zheng Yuan, who also understood this, sneered. He took a meaningful look at Zhou Qin and then at Wang Zhenyuan. Ding Nan, who was standing to one side, was very concerned about Zhou Qin. When she saw Zheng Yuan sneer, she quickly asked, "Master, what are you laughing at? Are you laughing at Zhou Qin for overestimating herself?" Zheng Yuan shook his head and said in a low voice, "No, I'm laughing at Wang Zhenyuan's ulterior motives." He didn't have to say the last sentence, but he said it. What do you think his intentions were? This sentence can be said to be a trap for Zhou Qin. No matter what she chooses, it will be difficult for her to escape from this trap. Otherwise, she will fall into a demonic barrier, and from then on, it will be difficult for her to make any progress in her cultivation. Ding Nan looked at her former, good sister, with a complicated look in her eyes. She bit her lip slightly and asked, "Is there no other way?" Zheng Yuan sneered and said, "Yes. Accept the challenge, and you must win. Otherwise, Zhou Qin's cultivation will be over." Ding Nan took a deep look at Zhou Qin and suddenly whispered, "She will definitely win." Zheng Yuan sneered and said, "Are you kidding? At best, Zhou Qin is just a cultivator who has just reached the Zhuji phase. How can she defeat Lu Yuqing? Do you know who Lu Yuqing is? He is the shitty of the leader of the Shenshao sect, and his Shentong Kung Fu has been famous all over the world for more than a decade. How could Zhou Qin be his match? Hey, no matter which path Zhou Qin chooses, it will almost be the end of her cultivation. Wang Zhenyuan is really good at scheming. Amazing, really amazing." As he said this, Zheng Yuan said earnestly to Ding Nan, "Pinger, you have to study hard. Fighting is not just about cultivation and spiritual energy, nor is it about whose powerful magical weapon is stronger. You see, Wang Zhenyuan has almost destroyed a good cultivation seedling with one sentence. This is called a silver tongue, which can fight against millions of soldiers." But Ding Nan didn't seem to hear him. She looked at Zhou Qin attentively and repeated stubbornly, "She will win. She has to win." Zheng Yuan was surprised and asked, "Oh, why?" There was a strange light in Ding Nan's eyes. She gritted her teeth and said word by word, "Because she must be defeated by me." Zheng Yuan was stunned and thought, why is Pinger so strange? Why does it seem like she has an irreconcilable hatred for Zhou Qin? As the two of them spoke in low voices, Li Yundong gave Wang Zhenyuan a meaningful look. Then, he turned his face and said to Zhou Qin with a gentle expression, "Zhou Qin, do you know what this battle means?" Although Zhou Qin had had a life-and-death battle with Yan Fang before, it had been a moment of life and death. If she didn't fight, she would die, so Zhou Qin had no choice. She had to fight desperately. In this case, she could stimulate all her potential. But now, it was very different. Zhou Qin could choose not to fight, so that Li Yundong could continue to compete for treasures. In this case, Zhou Qin felt that it was not right to accept the challenge, but it was also wrong not to. She couldn't help but whisper nervously, "I know. If I lose, Master, you will lose the right to seize the immortal pen." Hearing this, Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh. It was rare for him to show a very intimate attitude towards Zhou Qin in front of everyone. He reached out his hand and gently patted Zhou Qin on the shoulder. Then, he took her hand and said earnestly, "Zhou Qin, you are wrong. For me, the immortal pen is indeed a very powerful and important powerful magical weapon, but compared to you, it is worthless. There are as many powerful magical weapons in the world as there are hairs on an ox. Do I have to rob them all? As long as I have enough powerful magical weapons, and if I lose them, I can get them again in the future." Li Yundong looked at Zhou Qin gently, as if there was only him and Zhou Qin here. He said as if there was no one else around, "But if your cultivation falls into the devil's way here, there will be no turning back. So, for me, in this battle, what I am most concerned about is whether you can defeat your inner devil. As for the immortal pen, I don't care about it at all. Besides, no matter how precious a powerful magical weapon is, it is just a dead object. In this world, how can there be a reason to value a dead object more than a living person? Not to mention the immortal pen, even if all the powerful magical weapons in the world are piled here, they are not as important as you. Do you understand?" Li Yundong's words made everyone speechless for a while, especially the female cultivators of various sections. They all looked at Li Yundong with little stars in their eyes, and their eyes were full of love. Wei Qing put her hands together in front of her chest, like a praying girl. She said with infatuation, "Oh my God, it's so touching. Li Yundong is really a peerless saint. If I were Zhou Qin, it would be worth it even if I died in the next moment." Yu Sheng, who was standing to one side, rolled his eyes and snorted. "Is it that exaggerated? Are you still a cultivator? You've watched too many idol dramas, haven't you?" Wei Qing immediately rolled her eyes even more and said, "What do you know? Is there any woman in the world who doesn't want a man to value her? What's wrong with female cultivators? Aren't female cultivators women?" Although Zhang Ling and the others of the Zhengyi school had always had a grudge against Li Yundong, as female cultivators, they couldn't help but have a great change in their impression of Li Yundong after hearing his words. Zhang Ling couldn't help thinking in a daze, although Li Yundong has been against us again and again, he is also a sentimental person. Alas, if I had half the affection of Li Yundong, why would I have to spend the rest of my life alone? The little sister next to Zhou Ping couldn't help but tug at Zhou Ping's sleeve and whisper, "Shiji, Shiji. Li Yundong doesn't look like a bad person at all. How could a person who can be so good to his disciple in the world be a bad person?" When Zhou Ping heard Li Yundong's words, she suddenly felt sad and looked at Zhang Tianhe with extreme sadness. She thought to herself, "If my little Shirdi, who is more ambitious than the sky, could say such words to me like Li Yundong, even if it was just one sentence, then I would really die without regrets." Zhou Ping sighed deeply and smiled bitterly. "Little Shimmy, you don't understand. When you grow up a little, you will understand." Little junior sister blinked her eyes and nodded as if she understood. These female cultivators, who had nothing to do with them, were greatly moved when they heard this. Zhou Qin was even more excited when she heard it. In an instant, tears almost welled up in her eyes. At this moment, Zhou Qin only felt that her persistence and dedication seemed to have been rewarded. For a moment, she looked at Li Yundong with tears in her eyes. This woman, who was usually strong and indifferent, looked at Li Yundong with great affection. Tears kept rolling in her eyes, as if in the next second, if Li Yundong asked her to jump off a cliff, she would jump down without hesitation. Ruan Hongling saw that Zhou Qin was so moved that she was about to cry in public. She couldn't help but sigh in her heart, "You know that she likes you, but you still say such words to her. Alas, Li Yundong, how many people are you going to hurt? Is it really true that seeing Yundong will ruin your whole life?" However, Li Yundong didn't seem to see the various gazes and reactions of the people around him. He smiled, reached out his hand, and wiped the tears from the corners of Zhou Qin's eyes with his broad and soft palm. He said with a smile, as the saying goes, fighting is like using troops, and there is a saying in the art of war, using troops to attack tactics. Attacking the opponent's heart, breaking their Taoist heart, and subduing them without fighting is the best way to fight. Zhou Qin, don't give up without fighting. Even if you lose, it doesn't matter. The most important thing is not to leave any regrets in your heart. If you lose something, you can get it back. If you lose in a fight, you can win it back. But once regrets are left, they can't be made up for. Zhou Qin only felt that Li Yundong's palm was warm and soft. When his skin touched the corner of her eye, she even trembled slightly as if she had been electrocuted. His words made a warm power surge in her heart. This power quickly poured into her limbs and internal organs, making her feel as if she had endless strength. Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong deeply and suddenly smiled brightly. She nodded hard and said, "Master, I know. I won't let you down." Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "I will never be disappointed in you." After that, the two of them looked at each other and smiled. Zi Yuan, who had been watching Li Yundong with a complicated gaze, saw Zhou Qin take a deep breath and slowly close her eyes. She knew that Zhou Qin was going to make the final adjustment and prepare to go on stage, so she whispered, "Lu Yuqing's cultivation is not trivial. Zhou Qin, you fight with him. Remember not to let him set the rules of the fight. Also, try to compete with him in fist and foot skills, or with powerful magical weapons. Don't compete with him in magic, otherwise you will have no chance of winning." Li Yundong also nodded in agreement and said, "Yes, Zhou Qin, the space in the cabin is narrow, so it is more suitable for fighting with fists and feet. Later, you should try your best to fight him in close combat and narrow the huge gap between your cultivation and magic. In terms of magic, even 10 of you are no match for him. In terms of fists and feet, you and he are on the same starting line." After the two of them finished speaking, Zhou Qin slowly exhaled at this time. This breath shot out like a straight arrow until the couplets hanging on the cabin hit the wall and scattered in all directions, causing the pages of the couplets to rustle. Zhou Qin opened her eyes. She no longer looked back at Li Yundong or Zi Yuan. She just stared at Lu Yuqing, as if everyone in the world around her had disappeared, leaving only Lu Yuqing and herself. Zhou Qin took a step forward calmly. She cupped her hands and said in a sonorous voice, "I am Zhou Qin, the first disciple of Li Yundong. Jinren Lu, please enlighten me." Although the second chapter on the 8th is a little late, please forgive me for the sake of the fact that both chapters are really big chapters of 4,000 words. Tofu. Vote recommendation. Previous page. Return to table of contents. Next page. Error report. If you like, please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. Chapter 486. Go to watch net. Lu Yuqing hadn't expected that Li Yundong would support Zhou Qin so strongly in public. He hadn't expected that when Zhou Qin opened her eyes again, there would be no fear or worry in them at all. At this time, Zhou Qin had entered a state of selflessness. In her eyes, there was no one else but himself. Go to watch net. Lu Yuqing sneered secretly and was very disdainful of Zhou Qin's overconfidence. He thought mockingly, "A serious sheep is just a sheep. Does she really expect to beat me? She's just a little girl. If I fight with her, others will laugh at me for bullying her." Lu Yuqing snorted coldly, turned his head to Li Yundong, and said, "Jinrenli, if you send your disciple out, I'll also send my disciple out to pick her up. Otherwise, people will say that I'm bullying the weak." When the cultivators of the other sects heard this, they laughed in their hearts at the same time and thought to themselves, Lu Yuqing is not stupid. He knows that fighting with this girl will be unfair and humiliating. Sending his favorite disciple was the best choice. No matter what, his disciple's cultivation skills were better than this girl named Zhou Qin's. After hearing Lu Yuqing's words, Li Yundong smiled slightly and cupped his hands. Jinren Lu, I have no objection, but I don't know if your disciples have any objections? Aren't they afraid that if they lose the competition, they will lose the qualification to continue participating in the competition? As soon as this was said, everyone immediately cheered in their hearts. Su Chan even laughed and said, wonderful. Yundong is really smart and powerful. This is called giving him a taste of his own medicine. Lu Yuqing wants to break Sister Zhou Qin's Taoist heart, so Yundong will break the Taoist heart of his disciple. Let's see what he can do. Sure enough, Lu Yuqing's face changed greatly. He looked at Li Yundong unkindly and said in a deep voice, Jinren Li, what do you mean? How could my disciple be inferior to your disciple? Li Yundong chuckled and said, then you have to ask them. Lu Yuqing turned his head to look at his disciple and shouted with a straight face, who dares to fight? The disciples of their sect saw that Zhou Qin was extremely beautiful. Standing in the field, she was slender and elegant, with an outstanding heroic bearing. As the saying goes, a graceful lady is a good match for a gentleman. Zhou Qin's beauty naturally attracted the admiration of these young male cultivators. A rather handsome young man stepped forward and said, Master, I'm willing to fight for you. Only then did Lu Yuqing's face look a little better. He nodded slightly and said, well, you can be considered a cultivator who has cultivated to the Yongshan phase. I'll feel more at ease if you fight. When the young and handsome male disciple heard this, he was overjoyed. He turned his head and put on what he thought was his most handsome pose. He grinned and said, Jinren Zhou, please. Unexpectedly, Zhou Qin's eyes moved and looked at the male disciple like lightning. Zhou Qin's character was originally firm and strong, and her aura was strong and powerful. In addition, she had polished her aura and character all the way in the Himalayas to be as strong as steel. At this time, when she glared at him, her momentum was really extraordinary. Zhou Qin stared at him and said coldly, aren't you afraid of death? The young and handsome man felt as if he had been stared at by a ferocious beast. His whole body trembled, and there was a burst of panic in his heart for no reason. For a moment, he couldn't speak. When Zhou Qin saw a trace of fear in the man's eyes, she immediately sneered disdainfully and said, Jinren Lu, it seems that your disciple is not very good. Lu Yuqing suddenly became furious and shouted at him, you good-for-nothing, are you scared out of your wits with just one sentence? The young male disciple's face turned red and he lowered his head, not daring to retort. Zhou Qin looked back and said coldly, Jinren Lu, I think you'd better do it yourself. Don't waste everyone's time. Lu Yuqing's face was ugly. He gritted his teeth and sneered, I've never seen such an arrogant junior like you. Well, since you insist on courting death, I'll fulfill your wish. Zhou Qin didn't get angry. She calmly adjusted her breathing and tried to adjust her body to the best state. She said lightly, Jinren Lu, since you are older than me and have cultivated longer than me, we won't compete in magic. Otherwise, others will say that you are bullying the weak. How about we compete with our fists and feet? Lu Yuqing saw that Zhou Qin's words were obviously taking advantage of him and was still pretending to be obedient. He was so angry that he laughed and said, compete with fists and feet? Humph, how dare you compete with me in fists and feet? Do you know what kind of kung fu I've learned? Zhou Qin said coldly, I don't know. I just want to know, you've been talking for a long time. Are you going to fight or not? Lu Yuqing laughed angrily and said, well, come on, let me see what kind of amazing fists and feet you've learned. After that, he crossed his arms and lifted them from the bottom to the top. When he raised them to his chest, he suddenly shouted loudly. His whole body shook, and a stream of jinqi burst out from inside. The clothes on his body made a crisp sound, and the corners of his clothes fluttered without any wind. Lu Yuqing frowned and glared. He flicked his sleeves, and as soon as his sleeves touched the edge of the table next to him, there was a sudden snap, as if a sharp sword had cut a hole in the hard mahogany leg. As the saying goes, medicine carries the Tao, and martial arts defend the Tao. 9 out of 10 Taoists practiced martial arts. The cultivators in the cabin were also knowledgeable about fists and feet. They were suddenly shocked, and some cultivators couldn't help whispering, "What a strong force." Lu Yuqing flicked his sleeves and immediately showed an extremely powerful and fierce kung fu. Su Chan, Ruan Hongling, and the others all gasped when they saw this. Ruan Hongling couldn't help but ask Zi Yuan, "Sister Zi Yuan, what kind of kung fu is this?" Zi Yuan saw that Lu Yuqing was standing alone like a golden rooster. One of his hands was clenched into a fist and the other was stretched out behind him. Although he was standing on one leg, he was as stable as a pine tree, and there was a deadly killing move hidden in his posture. Zi Yuan was slightly shocked and whispered, "Oh no, this seems to be the Baji fist." Ruan Hongling was shocked. The Baji fist? Isn't Zhou Qin in danger? Zi Yuan's face was solemn as she quickly glanced at Li Yunyang. She shook her head at Ruan Hongling and didn't say anything else, but her expression was full of worry. There were also young cultivators in the cabin who had just entered the sect and had followed their seniors to participate in the Taoist assembly to watch the fun. Seeing Lu Yuqing's strange posture, they couldn't help asking, "What kind of fist technique is this? It looks so strange." An older cultivator who knew the ropes explained, "This is the Baji fist." The Baji fist? Is it the Baji fist that Emperor Kangxi personally nominated? Tai Chi can bring peace to the world, and the 8 levels of martial arts can determine the universe? Exactly. The Baji fist is known as the supreme of external boxing. TSK, it seems that Zhou Qin is in danger. I didn't expect Lu Yuqing of the Shenxiao sect to know the Baji fist. I thought he was practicing internal boxing. Aren't Buddhist fist techniques the majority of the external martial arts? That's not true. Ding Faxiang, who made the Baji fist famous all over the world, is a disciple of our Taoist sect. The person who taught him Kung Fu is Zhenren Huangju, who is known as the Slovenly Taoist. I don't know what Zhou Qin can do. Can she beat Lu Yuqing? While everyone was talking about it, Lu Yuqing suddenly glared at Zhou Qin and shouted, "Come on." After that, he moved forward. However, Zhou Qin suddenly raised her palm and said, "Wait a minute." Lu Yuqing forcibly withdrew his strength and said unhappily, "What else do you want to say?" Zhou Qin said, "Since we are fighting to the death, we naturally don't have to be responsible for killing or injuring each other, right?" Lu Yuqing sneered and said, "Of course. Little girl, if you are afraid, it's not too late to retreat now. You haven't cultivated to the level where your Yin spirit can travel. If you die, you will die like a lamp going out, and there will be nothing you can do." Zhou Qin smiled slightly, as if she hadn't heard Lu Yuqing's words. She said, "Then I see. Let's get started." Lu Yuqing took a deep breath and was about to step forward again, but as soon as he moved, he heard Zhou Qin say, "Wait." Lu Yuqing's qi had just gushed out like a flood from a sluice gate, but he had to immediately retract it. He was very depressed and shouted impatiently, "What do you want?" Zhou Qin smiled and said, "There are still some things we need to make clear first." Lu Yuqing said angrily, "What is it? Can't you say it all at once?" Zhou Qin smiled and said, "Didn't you talk for a long time before? Why are you getting impatient all of a sudden?" Lu Yuqing only felt that as a senior of the Shenxiao sect, he was actually entangled with a junior here. He didn't know where to use all his strength, and a wave of anger rushed to the top of his head. He said angrily, "Times have changed. How can it be the same? What on earth do you want? Tell me quickly." Zhou Qin smiled and said, "I want to say that no matter who wins or loses, who lives or who dies, we can't continue to pursue this matter. What do you think?" Lu Yuqing said angrily, "Nonsense. Do you still want to fight or not?" Zhou Qin calmed down and stood upright. She said, "Come on." Lu Yuqing snorted angrily and set up his posture again. Just as he was about to use all his strength, he heard Zhou Qin shout again, "Wait." At this time, the people on the sidelines couldn't help but laugh in a low voice. Lu Yuqing flew into a rage and said, "Why do you have so many tricks up your sleeve? If you don't want to fight, get out of here." Zhou Qin was not angry. She smiled slightly and said, "I have to say something to my master." After that, she ignored Lu Yuqing and walked over to Li Yundong's table. When Li Yunyang saw Zhou Qin coming over, he took advantage of the cover of his body and quietly gave her a thumbs up. He laughed and said in a low voice, "Not bad. Lu Yuqing has already been provoked by you to be impatient. She will be exhausted in the end." Zi Yuan also warned in a low voice, "Zhou Qin, remember to overcome strength with softness later. Don't fight Lu Yuqing head-on. He practices the Baji fist. This kind of fist technique is fierce and explosive. It's very terrifying." Zhou Qin nodded to show that she had heard it. She picked up the teacup and took a sip, then turned her head and walked back to the field. At this time, Lu Yuqing was already extremely impatient. In his heart, even if a beautiful and delicate girl like Zhou Qin knew kung fu, it was just a fancy move, not worth mentioning at all. As soon as she touched his Baji boxing, she would definitely be defeated. Zhou Qin moved her wrists and ankles on the spot and said to Lu Yuqing, "Zhenren Lu, are you ready?" At this time, Lu Yuqing was too lazy to put on a posture. He looked at Zhou Qin impatiently and said, "I've been ready for a long time. But are you ready?" Zhou Qin smiled slightly. Her right foot was slightly in front of her, and her body leaned forward a little. Her back was slightly raised, and she said, "I'm ready." Lu Yuqing waved at Zhou Qin. "Then come on." Zhou Qin took a deep breath and said slowly, "Well, okay." After that, her eyes suddenly opened, and all the strength in her body exploded like a high explosive. Zhou Qin's right foot suddenly stepped down, and with a bang, the yacht was obviously tilted. With this force, her body rushed toward Lu Yuqing like a cannonball. The people on the sidelines only felt a strong wind blowing in their faces, as if a fierce tiger had suddenly jumped down a mountain stream with unstoppable force. Lu Yuqing was shocked. He hadn't expected that Zhou Qin's sudden attack would be so powerful. In the blink of an eye, she had already rushed in front of him. If it had been an ordinary person, they might have been in a hurry at this time and been caught off guard by Zhou Qin. However, Lu Yuqing's Baji boxing was a kung fu that could be used for long-range and short-range attacks. The name of the Baji boxing was exactly the meaning of level 8. Level 8 can reach extremely far places in all directions. Lu Yuqing shouted loudly, "Come on." He tilted his body slightly, one hand behind him, and his 5 fingers closed like a bird's beak. The other hand was in front of him, and he slapped down on Zhou Qin's head. This was the turning back palm Chaoyang hand of the Baji boxing. Lu Yuqing's punch was like a strong man waving an iron hammer, smashing toward the top of Zhou Qin's head. If it hit, Zhou Qin's brain would burst and she would die on the spot. However, Zhou Qin didn't dodge. Her eyes widened, and with a loud shout, she punched hard at Lu Yuqing's throat. This was exactly the move that she had learned from Li Yundong when he had fought with Huang Yifei at school. Go straight, attack the enemy with the momentum of a thunderbolt. When everyone saw that Zhou Qin and Lu Yuqing were about to fight to the death, they were all shocked. They stood up and looked at the field with their eyes wide open. One was an old and experienced cultivation senior, and the other was a beautiful and young cultivation rookie. Who would win in a life-and-death battle? Chapter 487. Go to watch net. Zhou Qin's punch was like the roar of a cannon. As soon as it was thrown out, the surrounding air seemed to be squeezed open. Like a thunderbolt, it rushed in front of Lu Yuqing in the blink of an eye. Go to watch net. 7 K.O.M. Lu Yuqing was slightly startled. He had not expected that such a beautiful woman would actually fight with her life on the line. Although Lu Yuqing was surprised, he had practiced kung fu for many years and had reached the realm of releasing his strength as he wished. With a thought, he withdrew his palm that was about to hit Zhou Qin's head, and his body floated away like a ghost. Zhou Qin's fist hit nothing but air. Zhou Qin's punch missed, and then she felt a strong wind coming from her waist and abdomen. It was Lu Yuqing who had turned around and touched Zhou Qin's waist and abdomen with a backhand palm. This palm didn't seem to be as fierce as the turning body flip palm or the rising sun palm from before, but the force of this palm was soft and gentle. Furthermore, it was aimed at the vital parts of a person's waist and abdomen. As long as the position of the kidney was touched, the force would immediately drill into the body and cause great damage to the kidney. Zhou Qin gritted her teeth and twisted her slender waist hard. Her whole body seemed to be twisted into a fried dough twist. She raised her hand to the side of her body, trying to push away Lu Yuqing's hand that was touching her waist. Her other hand clenched into a fist and hit Lu Yuqing's chest with a whoosh. Lu Yuqing sneered. As soon as his hand touched Zhou Qin's, he immediately turned his wrist and his arm drilled toward Zhou Qin's waist and abdomen like a loach. His fingertips quickly wiped Zhou Qin's waist. This was the horse palm of the Vajra 8 styles of Bajiquan. Zhou Qin felt that as soon as the other party's fingertips touched her body, an extremely cold aura drilled into her body. She felt as if she had been hit by an electric current, and half of her body was numb. If it had been someone else, they would have directly lost the ability to resist. However, when Zhou Qin climbed Carry Holy Mountain, she had climbed with bare hands in the ice and snow. She had been able to persist in the extremely cold conditions. How could she not bear it at this time? Zhou Qin suffered a great loss as soon as she fought with Lu Yuqing, but she gritted her teeth fiercely. Like an injured tiger, a strong force burst out from her body. She took a step forward and got into Lu Yuqing's arms. She raised her arm and hit Lu Yuqing's heart with her elbow. She also lifted her knee and kicked toward Lu Yuqing's lower body. Lu Yuqing was shocked. He hadn't expected that Zhou Qin would not retreat after being hit by his palm. Instead, she would suddenly come to him like a madman and fight hand to hand with him. Close combat was about momentum. Lu Yuqing was proud of his profound kung fu, and he was only a senior. There was no reason for him to retreat in front of a young man, especially a young and beautiful woman. Without thinking, he immediately used his elbow to meet Zhou Qin's arm. At the same time, he also raised his knee and hit Zhou Qin's knee. Everyone saw Zhou Qin and Lu Yuqing's elbow and knee collide with each other, making two dull sounds, as if someone was hammering a sandbag with an iron hammer. As soon as Lu Yuqing and Zhou Qin collided fiercely, he suddenly felt that her bones were as hard as steel. Although his cultivation was high, he was not a master of the Jinshan phase after all. After all, the flesh was flesh. This collision only made his elbows and knees feel like they were being torn apart. However, Lu Yuqing saw that Zhou Qin didn't seem to feel any pain at all. Her face was as hard as iron, and the muscles of her cheeks were twisted together like steel bars. She gritted her teeth and elbowed his head again. Lu Yuqing didn't believe that Zhou Qin's elbows and knees would not be injured at all, so he elbowed Zhou Qin's elbow again. This time, the elbow joints of the two people collided heavily, making a crisp sound, which made everyone's hair stand on end. Su Chan was also a good fighter, especially proficient in the joints and bones of the human body. When she heard the sound, she couldn't help shivering and said with a pale face, "Oh no, the bones are broken. I don't know whose bones are broken." Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling didn't seem to hear her. They all stared at the field nervously, not daring to blink, for fear that the outcome would be decided if they blinked. Lu Yuqing and Zhou Qin fought hard. He only felt as if his elbow had been hit by an iron hammer, and the pain made him black out. But before he could react, he saw Zhou Qin hit him in the face with another hammer. Seeing this, Lu Yuqing was shocked and angry. This girl is too much. How can she hit me so unreasonably? What kind of messy moves are these? No one had expected that this beautiful and cold Zhou Qin would use a street hooligan-like move like a headbutt. Moreover, she had the momentum of cutting off all means of retreat and sinking the boat. This headbutt came without warning and was fierce and fierce. Lu Yuqing knew that he only had two choices. He could either choose to fight hard or choose to dodge. There was absolutely no third way. After all, Lu Yuqing was old and experienced. He knew that when they met on a narrow road, the brave would win. Whoever dodged first would be at a disadvantage in terms of momentum. When young people fought, their momentum was often the strongest in the first few moves. As long as he could withstand it, Zhou Qin's momentum would definitely decline, and he could win the battle. Lu Yuqing thought quickly. When he thought of this, he immediately used his qi to meet Zhou Qin's headbutt. With a muffled bang, the foreheads of the two people collided firmly. When everyone heard this sound, their hearts suddenly trembled. Many cultivators subconsciously touched their foreheads, as if they were also in extreme pain. Lu Yuqing was hit by Zhou Qin's headbutt, and his body actually leaned back. He felt a burning sensation on his forehead. Lu Yuqing knew that he must have been injured. Lu Yuqing was shocked and angry. This girl actually injured me? When he took a closer look, he saw that Zhou Qin, who was opposite him, had also leaned back. Her forehead was also dark red, and her face was covered with blood. But at this time, Zhou Qin abruptly stopped leaning back. She gritted her teeth and, regardless of the blood on her face, punched Lu Yuqing in the face again. Lu Yuqing was furious. He gritted his teeth and punched Zhou Qin's fist again. When their fists collided, there was another crisp crack, which made a terrible sound like an iron hammer smashing a bean. Lu Yuqing fought head-on several times in a row, and the pain made his whole body tremble uncontrollably. But Zhou Qin, who was opposite him, seemed to have become an unconscious monster. Her hair was disheveled, and her face was covered with blood. She was extremely ferocious as she headbutted Lu Yuqing again. Everyone looked at Zhou Qin in the field and felt their hair stand on end. They couldn't believe their eyes. How could such a beautiful woman be so fierce and desperate? Is she crazy? Some people couldn't help but look at Li Yundong and secretly speculated, could it be because of what Li Yundong said just now that Zhou Qin was so desperate? However, Li Yundong's eyes were fixed on the field. His face was calm, and there was no emotion to be seen. Only he knew that this was Zhou Qin's character and true colors. She would rather break than bend, and if she couldn't win, she would die. This girl was still calm and collected in the face of a gun. She dared to fight to the death on a tall building. Even in the midst of despair, she did not hesitate to jump from a tall building. She would rather destroy herself than surrender. This seemingly weak girl's body hid an extremely terrifying power. It could destroy all of her enemies, and it could also destroy herself. Lu Yuqing saw Zhou Qin smashing her head over again. At this time, This beautiful woman had completely transformed into a ferocious and extremely fierce Bonda lamb. Anyone who was her enemy would be dragged into the bloody abyss by her and perish together with her. Zhou Qin's madness was far beyond Lu Yuqing's expectations and imagination. In the face of another fierce attack from Zhou Qin, he finally hesitated and became timid. He took a step back and finally chose not to fight head-on. Instead, he chose to avoid the sharp edge. Lu Yuqing thought to himself, it's impossible for Zhou Qin to maintain such a fierce attack forever. As long as she can hold on, she will collapse by herself. But as soon as he chose to retreat, an old cultivator sighed in a low voice and shook his head. It's over. The opportunity has been lost. It's impossible for Lu Yuqing to make a comeback. From now on, there will be no Zhenren Lu Yuqing in the cultivation world. A young cultivator who didn't understand asked in a low voice, why is that? Zhou Qin's madness won't last long. As long as we avoid it and wait for her to be tired, we can fight back and win, right? The older cultivator said earnestly, that's not right. Haven't you heard of the saying that fists are afraid of the young, and sticks are afraid of the old? If the two of them compete in weapons, then it depends on who is more skilled in kung fu. In that case, Lu Yuqing will definitely win. But when it comes to fighting with fists, courage, internal energy, and endurance will be tested. Although the time they fought just now was short, it consumed a lot of physical strength. These few fights are even more tiring than your 3 consecutive fights. Although Zhou Qin is a woman, her aura is extremely strong, and at this time, her momentum is full. It can be said that she is in her peak state. Moreover, she is so young, so her endurance must be better than Lu Yuqing's. If Lu Yuqing wants to fight with Zhou Qin, he may not be able to outlast her. What's more, the first rule of Baji Fist is that people's hearts are upright, and the next is that people who practice martial arts must be courageous. Strength and skills are secondary. Lu Yuqing learned Baji Fist by himself. If he loses his courage, his kung fu will be reduced by at least half. How can he win? The young cultivators were still a little disapproving when they heard this, but soon the change in the situation on the field convinced them. At this time, as soon as Zhou Qin saw that Lu Yuqing had chosen to retreat, her attacks became more and more crazy. She pushed, hammered, entangled, kicked, burst, bit, and smashed. All of them were heavy blows, and all of them were fighting with their lives. Lu Yuqing had lost his momentum and didn't dare to fight Zhou Qin head-on anymore. Every time he wanted to dodge, he thought that Zhou Qin would be exhausted. However, not only was Zhou Qin not exhausted, but she was even more fierce and powerful than the last. Lu Yuqing was beaten back again and again, but after all, he was strong. Although he was retreating, his feet were not in disorder at all. After dodging for a while, he saw that Zhou Qin's attacks were like a storm, and there was no sign of them stopping. Instead, he was a little out of breath. Lu Yuqing was anxious. He knew that if he continued to waste time like this, it was very likely that he would be exhausted to death by Zhou Qin here. He calmed himself down. When he saw Zhou Qin's punch coming, he suddenly turned around and ran back. Without thinking about it, Zhou Qin immediately stepped forward to chase after him. But as soon as she caught up with him, she saw Lu Yuqing suddenly turn around and sweep his elbow, like a powerful and strong knife-dragging chop. This move was sudden and unexpected. It was the knife-dragging skill taken from the battlefield. In the past, Guan Yu, the warrior sage, had relied on this move to kill countless ghosts. Those who knew what it was immediately cheered loudly. But as soon as their voices came out, they saw Zhou Qin's body suddenly lean forward quickly. It seemed that because she had rushed too fast before, she could not control her momentum, so she simply leaned forward to avoid Lu Yuqing's unique skill. But as she dodged, the back of her head and her entire back were exposed to Lu Yuqing. Lu Yuqing's elbow swept across Zhou Qin's back. Seeing that Zhou Qin had revealed such a big flaw, he was overjoyed. He raised his hand and smashed the back of Zhou Qin's head with a hammer. But as soon as he raised his hand, Zhou Qin suddenly turned over and kicked out from behind her head. Like a scorpion wagging its tail, she pounced on Lu Yuqing's face like lightning and thunder. Lu Yuqing hadn't expected that Zhou Qin, who had always fought in a rough and simple way, would use such a subtle move. He didn't even have time to react before Zhou Qin kicked him in the face. Lu Yuqing only felt a pain in his face and almost fainted. He immediately closed his eyes and retreated. His hands were like two closed doors in front of him, waiting for Zhou Qin to break in. As expected, Zhou Qin immediately chased after him without hesitation. She slapped Lu Yuqing's ear mercilessly, but Lu Yuqing was experienced. His hands stretched out like poisonous snakes and touched Zhou Qin's neck in an instant. As long as he exerted force, Zhou Qin's delicate neck would be broken by Lu Yuqing. But just as Lu Yuqing grabbed Zhou Qin's neck, he also felt that Zhou Qin's fingers had touched his eyelids at the same time. A chill went straight to the back of his head, as if Zhou Qin's two slender fingers would penetrate his eye sockets and pierce straight into his brain in the next second. Although Lu Yuqing also held Zhou Qin's life in his hands, he did not feel that Zhou Qin had the slightest intention of giving up. He had no doubt that if he broke her neck, this woman would definitely pierce his eye sockets with her fingers before he broke her neck. She would die with him. Was it worth it to give up his life for a fight? At this moment, Lu Yuqing even forgot that he was a young spirit master. Zhou Qin's crazy and terrible way of fighting had completely destroyed his will to resist. Without thinking about it, Lu Yuqing immediately let go of Zhou Qin's neck and shouted in horror, "Stop, I admit defeat, I admit defeat." At this time, he felt Zhou Qin's fingertips stop on his eyelids, as if the muzzle of a gun was against his forehead. It was cold. Zhou Qin maintained the posture of two dragons fighting for a pearl. Her two fingers were like strong steel hooks. Her hair was disheveled and her face was covered in blood. She gritted her teeth and said fiercely, "Do you really admit defeat?" Lu Yuqing nodded without hesitation. "I admit defeat." At this time, the ferocious expression on Zhou Qin's face slowly faded. She withdrew her hand and let out a long breath. Her eyes swept around sharply and she said loudly, "My master is not a great grandmaster today, but he will definitely be one in the future. Who else dares to question my identity as the first disciple of the sect? Come out and speak." Only then did everyone understand that Zhou Qin was so fierce and desperate just to seek justice for Li Yundong and herself. However, for the sake of justice, for the sake of a few words of contempt, was it worth it to risk his life so fiercely? For a moment, all the cultivators in the cabin looked at Zhou Qin in a daze. No one answered her, and no one took a step forward. Zhou Qin stood proudly in the field, looking down at the crowd and shouting 3 times in a row. Seeing that no one responded, she slowly walked toward Li Yundong. Zhou Qin walked to Li Yundong's side, and her ferocious face suddenly became gentle and affectionate. She broke into a smile and said softly, "Master, I didn't embarrass you, did I?" Li Yundong's eyes were fixed on Zhou Qin, and his heart was filled with mixed feelings. He nodded slowly and said, "No, you are very good, very good." Zhou Qin smiled brightly. Everyone felt that the fierce aura of this woman had disappeared. In an instant, the blood-stained steel knife had turned into a blood-stained peony. Her beauty was sad, and her appearance was peerless. After Zhou Qin smiled, her body suddenly tilted and fell softly toward Li Yundong. Only then did everyone know that Zhou Qin was already an arrow at the end of its flight. She had held on until now with one breath. The cultivators of all sects sighed. Du Fei of the Chuanjian dragon sect shook his head and sighed. After this battle, all the cultivators in the world will know Zhou Qin's reputation for being iron-blooded and brave. They will all know that Li Yundong has such a disciple who can't be easily taught. From now on, no one will dare to look down on Li Yundong, and no one will dare to look down on Zhou Qin, a cultivator who has just entered the sect. Chapter 488. Go to watch net. He took 2 steps forward and hugged her. He mobilized his Jinqi to scan her body and was shocked. The qi in her body was in a mess, and the bones in her elbows, knees, and fists were broken beyond recognition. Li Yundong took a deep breath, narrowed his eyes, and gave Lu Yuqing an unfriendly look. He saw that Lu Yuqing was standing there in a daze. Ever since he had said that he would admit defeat, she had lost her spirit. He had been standing there like a walking corpse, motionless, as if he was extremely regretful. Why didn't I persist a little longer? Li Yunyang knew that Lu Yuqing's Taoist heart had been broken. From now on, his cultivation was over. The anger in his heart dissipated a lot. He sighed slightly and gently wiped the blood from her face with his hand. Does it hurt? Zhou Qin forced a smile. The sharp pain in her body made her unable to speak for a while. At this time, the qi in her body was still very strong, but her body was too seriously injured. Especially after the fierce head-on collision, her bones had been severely damaged. Watch net. Seeing this, Zi Yuan hurriedly stepped forward and reached out to take the pulse on Zhou Qin's wrist. She took a breath, and the nervous expression on her face suddenly relaxed a lot. She let out a breath and said softly, "Fortunately, there is no danger to her life. It's just that many of her bones are broken." After that, Zi Yuan asked Zhou Qin in a low voice, "How do you feel?" Zhou Qin's lips trembled as she forced a smile and said, "I'm okay, just a little dizzy." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Fool, if you hit him with your head like that, it would be strange if you didn't faint." He turned around and said to Su Chan, who was looking at Zhou Qin with concern, "Chaner, will you take Zhou Qin to see a doctor?" Before Su Chan could speak, she saw Zhou Qin struggling to stand up. She rushed to shout, "No!" Her shout immediately affected her injuries, and she almost fainted from the pain. Li Yundong quickly pressed her shoulder and said, "Don't move. What else do you want to do with your injuries?" Zhou Qin grabbed Li Yunyang's clothes tightly with one hand and said with a pleading face, "Master, don't let me leave. I'm fine. Let me watch from the side, okay?" Li Yundong glanced at Zi Yuan with a wry smile, wanting to ask for her opinion. Zi Yuan knew that Zhou Qin was born stubborn. She sighed softly and nodded slightly. "It's okay. Let her stay here. Her internal organs are not injured, and her meridians are not damaged. As long as she doesn't exercise strenuously, it will be fine." Li Yundong sighed and helplessly helped Zhou Qin to the side of the table. He let Su Chan hold her gently and said, "Well, I can't do anything to you. Just watch from the side." Zhou Qin's face lit up with joy and she stopped talking. She looked at Li Yundong quietly from the side. She sat like a peony, quiet and beautiful, making it impossible for people to associate the fierce madman just now with her. When everyone saw Li Yundong and Zhou Qin talking as if there was no one else around, they were all shocked by Zhou Qin's ferocity. For a moment, they didn't say anything to provoke them. Even Wang Zhenyuan looked at Zhou Qin in surprise and thought, Li Yundong has such a disciple. This is really like adding wings to a tiger. In time, Zhou Qin will definitely become a great person. Why don't I have such a disciple? Damn it! Thinking of this, Wang Zhenyuan cupped his hands to Li Yundong and said, "Zhenrenli, your Fox Zen school has won 3 games in a row. Do you want to continue?" Li Yundong smiled slightly. "Of course. I wonder which fellow Taoist would like to give me some advice." The cultivators of the various sects looked at each other for a moment. They were still immersed in the strong shock and impact that Zhou Qin had brought them, and some of them couldn't come to their senses. Moreover, Li Yundong had rested for a while, so at this time, he was already full of breath and spirit. If they went on stage again, wouldn't it be like helping others? The cultivators of the various sects turned their heads to look at the few people who were recognized as the strongest in the field and had a grudge against Li Yundong at the same time. But at this time, Zhang Tianhe of the Zhengyi school looked down at the ground, as if there was a flower growing there. Wang Lingfei looked down at his slender and delicate hands, as if he was admiring a peerless treasure. Yu Sheng of the Chuanzhen dragon sect closed his eyes, as if he had fallen asleep. Zhang Cuni, who had said that he would win first place, was drinking tea slowly, as if he was on vacation. For a moment, everyone cursed in their hearts, damn it, he was so arrogant at first, but now he's scared. Zhang Tianhe, Wang Lingfei, Yu Sheng, and Zhang Cuni seemed to know what everyone was thinking. They looked at each other at the same time, and then they went back to their own things, looking at the floor and drinking tea. Seeing that there was going to be an awkward silence, Wan Zhenyuan laughed again and said, "Zhenrenli, congratulations on accepting a good disciple. Unfortunately, there is only one. If there is another such good disciple, I'm afraid the Taoist assembly will no longer be held. I'll just give you the prize directly, Wan Zhenyuan spoke in a heroic manner, and his words were full of praise for Li Yundong. But only Zhou Qin and other scheming people knew that Wan Zhenyuan's words had no good intentions. His subtext was to tell everyone that Li Yundong only had one disciple who could fight, and now he was useless and couldn't go on stage again. As long as everyone took turns to fight, Li Yundong wouldn't be able to withstand it even if he was made of iron or a bronze Luohan. Zhou Qin looked at Wan Zhenyuan deeply and thought, this Master Wan has always been hiding needles in his words and secretly stirring up trouble. What does he want to do? Is he trying to balance the situation, or is he specifically targeting Master? If he is trying to balance the situation, then he must want to use the immortal pen to weaken the strength of the cultivators of various sections. If he is targeting Master, then... For a moment, Zhou Qin was so lost in her thoughts that she forgot the pain in her body. She could understand this problem, and most of the cultivators present were not stupid. They could more or less understand this. Therefore, when Wan Zhenyuan said this, there was still silence. Everyone just laughed, but no one stepped forward. Seeing this, Wan Zhenyuan sighed and cupped his hands to Li Yundong. Zhenrenli, I admire you. Ever since Zhenren Luo Gongyuan and Zhenren Yi Fashion established the Taoist assembly in the Tianbao years, there has never been a young cultivator like you who has won first place in the world. Today, you've created a new record. After that, he waved to his subordinates and shouted, "Bring me the immortal pen." When the crowd heard this, they immediately pricked up their ears. What? Li Yundong won just like that? Dang Chang, who had been joking, shouted in surprise, "The Taoist assembly is over? It can't be." The last one took 3 days and 3 nights to decide the winner. Wan Zhenyuan cupped his hands to Li Yundong and said to the crowd with a smile, "Zhenren Li's magical power is amazing, and he is good at fighting. He also has a good disciple. No one is willing to go forward to fight with him, so he naturally won. Zhenren Li is really a young hero. I admire you, really admire you. From the looks of it, from today onwards, you will be the #1 young cultivator in the world." When everyone heard this, their hearts suddenly surged. It's one thing to go on the stage or not, but it's absolutely impossible for the Taoist assembly to end like this and let Li Yundong take away the immortal pen so easily. Zhang Tianhe, Wang Lingfei, Yu Sheng, and Zhang Cuni, who had originally stayed out of the matter, suddenly opened their eyes wide. As if they had a tacit understanding, they stood up and shouted at the same time, "I'll do it." Everyone was shocked, and then they all became excited. Well, either none of us go on the stage, or all of us go on the stage together. Well, these four are the best of the younger generation in the cultivation world. If they go on the stage, they should be able to suppress Li Yundong. Zhengyi School was determined to re-establish its position as the hegemon of the cultivation world, so they were very unwilling to see a powerful cultivator lead a crooked path to win the first prize of the Taoist assembly. The other sects were even more unwilling to see a notorious sect suddenly rise, because it indirectly affected their interests. Why can the Fox Zen School shine so brightly? What right do they have to suppress us? People fight for their dignity, and Buddhas fight for their incense. No one would think that they were inferior to others, especially cultivators. Zhang Tianhe, Wang Lingfei, Yu Sheng, and Zhang Cuni stood up at the same time and spoke at the same time. They were also stunned and looked at each other. Then they snorted and turned their faces away, looking down on each other. Seeing that he had finally provoked these four people, Wang Zhenyuan was overjoyed. He smiled and said to them, "Well, you are indeed the descendants of a famous family. You have courage. I just don't know which Zhenren will go on stage first." Zhang Tianhe and the other three looked at each other. There was a hint of wariness in their eyes, but they all remained silent. Wang Zhenyuan had an idea and said, "How about drawing lots?" When everyone heard this, they were immediately happy and said with a smile, "Master Wan, that's a good idea. Let's do it this way." These cultivators didn't want to go on stage anyway, so they followed suit and made a ruckus. Zhang Tianhe and the others were a little embarrassed and froze on the spot. As a Sichuan native, Zhang Cuni had always had the character of, "I am the best in the world." He was the first to say loudly, "Okay, Master Wan, let's do it this way." As soon as he spoke, the other three had to speak up. Wang Zhenyuan was overjoyed and immediately asked someone to bring him a ball of paper. After he finished writing, he asked someone to bring an airtight jar and threw the note into it. He said with a smile, "You four, please. Don't use your magic, or it will be regarded as cheating and you will be disqualified." Zhang Tianhe was a gentle person. He smiled slightly and did not speak. He took the lead and reached into the jar to find a note. He opened it and saw that there was no word on it. Wang Zhenyuan smiled and said, "Congratulations, Zhenren Zhang." Zhang Tianhe drew a blank piece of paper and breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. But as soon as he let out a sigh of relief, he suddenly became vigilant. Why did I feel like I had been pardoned when I didn't draw the first piece of paper? Am I really afraid of Li Yunyang? Zhang Tianhe's face darkened for a moment and he shouted in his heart, "No, this is impossible. I am stronger than him, much stronger than him." Zhang Cuni of the Qingqing sect then came to draw the note. He looked strangely at Zhang Tianhe, who was standing to one side, but he didn't think too much about it. He reached out and also drew a piece of paper. Everyone saw that both of them had drawn a piece of paper, so the next person to go on stage would either be Yu Sheng or Wang Lingfei. Wang Lingfei narrowed his eyes slightly and said to Yu Sheng, "Zhenren you go first." Yu Sheng snorted and said, "It's just a 50% chance. Let's fight. What's there to be afraid of?" After that, he stopped touching the note and said loudly, "I'll go this time." Everyone immediately cheered, "Good job, Zhenren Yu." Li Yunyang smiled slightly and cupped his hands to Yu Sheng. "Zhenren Yu, we're going to fight again. I wonder what we're going to compete in this round." Yu Sheng walked into the field unhurriedly, cupped his hands, and said, "Zhenren Li, I admire your powerful magic and powerful magical weapons. I admit that I am inferior to you. Therefore, I want to compete with you in Yang spirit and see whose Yang spirit is more powerful. What do you think?" Li Yunyang laughed and said, "I dare not disobey." Everyone was overjoyed when they heard this. They all knew that in a fight, only a fight between Yang spirits consumed the most qinqi. Often, after a fight, a cultivator's Jinqi would be almost exhausted, and there would not be much left. Li Yundong had agreed to fight with Yusheng for Yang spirits, so wouldn't he be exhausted to death? Even if he won, he would definitely suffer a great loss in the next round. At that time, wouldn't it be a great advantage for them to go up? For a moment, everyone was thinking about all kinds of tricks. Wang Zhenyuan looked at the field in the cabin. At this time, the field had been messed up by Zhou Qin and Lu Yuqing. He smiled and said, "Wait for me to get someone to clean up the field, and then the two of you can fight again. How about that?" As soon as he finished speaking, a disciple of the Gazao sect suddenly ran in a hurry and whispered something in Wang Zhenyuan's ear. When Wang Zhenyuan heard this, his face suddenly changed and he shouted sternly, "How could such a thing happen? Who are they? If nothing unexpected happens, there should be another round in an hour and a half. See." Chapter 489. Go to watch net. The disciple of the Gazao sect, who had come to inform them, whispered a few words in Wang Zhenyuan's ear. Wang Zhenyuan said angrily, "What are you doing? Didn't you get through to them in advance?" The disciple muttered in a low voice with an aggrieved expression, "We did get through to them, but it seems that a few new policemen have come this time. Go to watch net. 7 KOM. When Wang Zhenyuan heard this, he suddenly felt a headache coming on. He knew that a new official had to be careful. This kind of new policemen like to cause trouble the most, and they could often stir up trouble. There were so many cultivators here, so they were not afraid of these policemen. However, the cultivation world had never liked to deal with this kind of judicial department. The fact that the police had come to the Taoist assembly hosted by the Gazao sect really made Wang Zhenyuan lose face. When the crowd heard the conversation between Wang Zhenyuan and his disciple, they all burst into an uproar. They said at once, "Master Wang, what are you doing? Why are the police here?" Wang Zhenyuan cupped his hands with a wry smile and said, "Fellow Taoists, don't be impatient. This must be an accident. Just explain it clearly." Someone said in a strange tone, "Explain? How? If you want to explain, you can do it yourself. We won't accompany you." "That's right. If the police can come now, who else can come later?" Seeing that the crowd was making a ruckus, Wang Zhenyuan stretched out his hands and said loudly, "Everyone, be quiet, be quiet. I already have a plan to deal with it." When the crowd heard this, they temporarily quieted down and looked at Wang Zhenyuan with unfriendly eyes. As long as they were dissatisfied with what he said, they would immediately curse him. Wang Zhenyuan said loudly, "I have already prepared a good and quiet place in the mysterious temple. I originally wanted to let all of you go and have a look tomorrow, but I didn't expect such a thing to happen today. Why don't we all go together? What do you think?" The cultivators on the boat looked at each other. They were very unhappy, but there was nothing they could do. They hesitated for a moment, and sure enough, they heard the sound of an alarm coming from outside. They suddenly burst into an uproar and could only nod helplessly. Wang Zhenyuan smiled and cupped his hands at the crowd. "Everyone, let's go to the mysterious view. I will send a disciple there to lead the way." Zhang Ling of the Zhengyi school took the lead and walked out of the boat. Then, the other disciples of the Zhengyi school also walked out in a line. The cultivators on the yacht shouted and followed them one after another. Su Chan widened her eyes and said, "No way. How did the Taoist assembly end up like this?" Ruan Hongling also didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She said, "Why is it like an underground meeting? What is going on?" Li Yundong smiled and said to the two of them, "Well, don't say any more. Since everyone is going, let's go." He turned his head and whispered to Zhou Qin, "Can you move?" Zhou Qin smiled gently and nodded. "Not bad. After that, she struggled to stand up. As soon as she moved, she immediately felt a sharp pain in her body. She couldn't help but frown. Li Yundong sighed and said, "Don't try to be brave. Forget it. I'll carry you there." As he said this, he put Zhou Qin on his back and said to Ziyuan with a smile, "Ziyuan, where is the mysterious view?" Ziyuan smiled and said, "Do you really think I know everything? Do you think I know everything?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "Is there anything in the world that you don't know?" Ziyuan smiled and said, "There is no end to learning. There are many things that I don't know. But coincidentally, I happen to know where the mysterious view is." Ruan Hongling, who was standing to one side, interrupted proudly, "My Shiji Ziyuan knows everything about astronomy and geography. She will definitely know such a small thing." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Then please lead the way, Zhenren Ziyuan." The group of people chatted and laughed as they got out of the yacht. At this time, as soon as they got out of the yacht, they saw a few police cars parked on the side of the road at the dock. Several young policemen in uniforms shouted at the Taoist priests who had rushed out of the yacht, "Hey, stop, all of you." However, these cultivators all had unique skills. They laughed and didn't walk very fast, but with a few steps, they left the policemen far behind. When Li Yundong and the others came out, the policemen turned their heads and saw a young and handsome man leading a group of stunning beauties out of the yacht. They had never seen so many stunning beauties appear in front of them, and they were all stunned. A policeman looked at them for a while, then turned to his superior and asked, "Captain Zhang, what should we do?" The captain, surnamed Zhang, scratched his hair and said angrily, "Damn it, let's go up and arrest them first. We'll take them back and ask them slowly." The policeman immediately stepped forward excitedly and shouted, "Stop." Li Yundong turned his head and smiled. He said to Ziyuan and the others, "Let's compete and see who can run faster. What do you think?" Except for Zhou Qin, who was lying quietly on Li Yundong's back, all the girls laughed and jumped forward. In a few moments, they had disappeared without a trace. When the policemen saw these beautiful women disappear in a few leaps like chivalrous heroes, they immediately stopped in their tracks and stood there dumbfounded. They were dumbfounded and speechless. Only Li Yundong was still standing there with Zhou Qin on his back. He smiled at them and said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" Captain Zhang seemed to wake up from a dream and said, "Someone called the police and said that you were holding an illegal assembly." Li Yundong asked curiously, "Who called the police?" Captain Zhang's face became serious and he said with a dignified expression, "I can't tell you this. You should go back with us first. It will be fine after we explain it clearly." Li Yundong was not stupid. Everyone had left, and he was the only one left. Wouldn't he be a scapegoat if he stayed? He laughed and said, "Forget it, I'll go to your place for tea another day. I still have something to do here, so I'll go first." Captain Zhang was anxious and shouted, "Stop, don't go." After that, he shouted at his subordinates, "Why are you standing there? Go and catch him." The policeman seemed to wake up from a dream and quickly rushed forward. Li Yundong didn't want to be entangled with them. He laughed and carried Zhou Qin on his back. With a few leaps, he jumped from one side of the moat to the other and then went far away. This time, the policemen were stunned. They stood by the river and their eyes almost fell out. Damn, is he shooting a movie? Is it that exaggerated? At this time, Chris, John, Alba, and the others, who had been standing in the distance, were also staring at Li Yundong's figure with their mouths agape. The three foreigners looked at each other, and Alba said, "Am I seeing things? He just jumped from one side of the moat to the other." John stammered, "It seems so. God, he is carrying an adult on his back. Although it is a woman, but it is also an adult woman. How did he jump over?" Chris's eyes widened. Once again, she saw a kind of inhuman power in this young man, which confirmed what her grandmother had once said to her: there were some mysterious people in this world, and they had mysterious and powerful powers. Alba's face turned pale. If he goes to the Olympic Games, I guess he can win all the gold medals in track and field events, right? Chris didn't know why, but she sighed softly and said, my grandmother is right. China is really a place with hidden talents. I don't know how many strange people are hiding among the people. Alba stared at her and said, why don't they come out to win glory for our country and serve our country? Don't Chinese people pay the most attention to contributing to their country? Chris shook her head and said, they are very special. We can't measure them with ordinary people's thinking. Alba thought for a moment and nodded. That's true. That Li Yundong is a male chauvinist bastard. John said with a sad face, ladies, the question now is, what should we do next? Chris frowned and said, let's follow them and see what's going on. John smiled bitterly and said, but how? Who are you going to follow? At this time, the three foreigners looked at each other and found that almost all the people on the yacht had run away. How could they still be seen on the street? On the opposite side of the road from Chris, Xinyan, Shinsu, and Tachibana Wakako were looking at this scene in surprise. Tachibana Wakako said innocently, Master Xinyan, why are they running? Is it because they know that we are coming? Xinyan didn't say anything. He just looked at the policemen who were in a daze with a strange look. However, Shinsu sneered and said, these useless Chinese cultivators were scared away by a few unarmed policemen. Tachibana Wakako said with a disappointed face, ah. Then won't we be able to watch the fun? As she said this, she reached out to pull Xinyan's sleeve and begged, Master Xinyan, what should we do? Xinyan thought for a moment, then waved his hand. After a while, a sparrow fell from his palm. He muttered a few incantations, then shook his arm, and the sparrow flew into the air with a whoosh. Xinyan turned to Tachibana Wakako and said with a smile, don't worry, Tachibana Wakako. It won't be long before we find them. These Chinese cultivators are too ridiculous. They were actually driven away by a few policemen to change places for a Taoist assembly. Hee, it's really incredible and ridiculous. Just as the sparrow sent out by Xinyan was flying in the air, Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and the others had already gathered together again. The group soon arrived in front of the mysterious temple on Guanxian Street in Dongwu City. Li Yundong saw that Guanxian Street was a bustling commercial pedestrian street, but there was an antique Taoist temple in the depths of the pedestrian street. The Taoist temple was full of incense, and there were many tourists. He asked curiously, is this the place? Zi Yuan nodded and said, yes, this is the mysterious temple. Because this street is in front of the mysterious temple, it is also called Guanxian Street. As soon as she finished speaking, a person suddenly came over from the side of the road and asked them, excuse me, are you Zhenren Li Yundong and Zhenren Zi Yuan? Li Yundong turned his head and saw a young man dressed no different from an ordinary person talking to him. He asked curiously, are you from the Gazao sect? The young man smiled slightly and said, Zhenren Li, please forgive me for not showing Taoist etiquette in the busy market, so as not to attract people's attention. Our sect master ordered me to meet you here. Please come with me. Li Yundong smiled and said, well, lead the way. The group of people slowly followed behind the young man. Li Yundong looked around carefully and saw that although there were fashionable and famous shops everywhere on the pedestrian street, none of the shops were tall. The tallest one was no more than 5 floors, and the overall building still maintained a classical charm. In particular, the young man took them through a few detours from the mysterious temple and came to a narrow alley paved with bluestones. There were classical garden buildings with white walls and black tiles everywhere, making people feel as if they had stepped into a quiet and elegant paradise from the noisy world of mortals. Li Yundong couldn't help but ask curiously, there's actually such a place in the busy city of Dongwu, where every inch of land is worth gold? Are they all from the Gazao sect, or are they borrowed? The young man leading the way smiled slightly and said proudly, our sect master has several gardens in Dongwu city. This is just one of them. Li Yundong turned to Ziyuan and whispered, is the Gazao sect so rich? Ziyuan also whispered, external alchemy is the richest of all the cultivation sects in the world, because they make a living by selling medicine. Haven't you heard of the saying, in addition to robbing, they also sell medicine? The most profitable business in the world is robbery and selling medicine. Li Yundong secretly sighed and said, that's true, and selling medicine is a legal robbery. The group of people followed the young man for a few more steps. The young man suddenly stopped in front of a round arched wooden door and said with a smile, we're here. Jinren Ziyuan, please come in. As he spoke, he walked to the door, pushed it open, and respectfully invited Li Yundong and the others in. Li Yundong carried Zhou Qin on his back and led Su Chan, Ziyuan, and the others in. Li Yundong looked around and saw that he was in an elegant garden with flowers in full bloom. He was surrounded by grass, green trees, rockery, and strange rocks. In front of him was a gravel path paved with cobblestones, and in the distance was a long corridor with red pillars and white walls. It was full of antique poetic and picturesque scenery. What was even rarer was that there was a faint melodious sound of pingtan singing from the depths of the garden. A delicate female voice was softly singing a song in the dialect of Dongwu. For a moment, Li Yundong and the others were stunned. Seeing such a beautiful scene, Li Yundong couldn't help sighing. It's said that the gardens of Jiangnan are the best in the world, and the gardens of Dongwu are the best in Jiangnan. They really deserve their reputation. Master Wan really knows how to live a good life. Su Chan couldn't help but say with a leisurely and yearning expression, Yundong, when can we live in such a garden? Li Yundong smiled and pinched the tip of the girl's nose. Okay, but even if we have a garden, who will sing songs for me? Su Chan pointed to herself with a smile and said, me, I can sing. Li Yundong laughed and said, you can sing songs? That's rare. Sing one for me when we go back. Li Yundong and Su Chan always flirted with each other regardless of the occasion. Ziyuan looked helplessly at the young man who was leading the way. She smiled apologetically and said, we can go in by ourselves. There's nothing for you to do here. The young man nodded with a smile and turned to leave. Ruan Hongling looked at his figure with a strange look in her eyes. When Li Yundong saw this, he couldn't help laughing and said, what's wrong? Are you dumbfounded when you see a handsome guy? Ruan Hongling rolled her eyes at Li Yundong. What? I just think this guy is a little strange. Li Yundong smiled and said, what's so strange about it? Ruan Hongling said curiously, it's the first time I've seen a man suddenly see so many beautiful women, and he can look normal without feeling surprised or dazed at all. Li Yundong laughed and said, you're beating around the bush to praise yourself, aren't you? Ruan Hongling snorted and said, bah, you can't spit out ivory from a dog's mouth. Don't be so long-winded. Let's go. Li Yundong smiled and led the way. Su Chan, Ziyuan, and the others admired the unique arrangement of flowers and plants in the garden and couldn't help but sigh. Only Ruan Hongling was thinking about what had just happened. The more she thought about it, the more strange she felt. For a moment, she unconsciously fell behind the group. When she reached the corner of a long corridor, Ruan Hongling suddenly felt as if someone was watching her. She turned her head and saw a figure quickly flash into the corner. Although it was fast, Ruan Hongling still recognized the person. She was shocked and wondered, why does this figure look so much like Chao Yi, Shibua of the Fox Zen School? See. Chapter 490. Go to watch net. Ruan Hongling only glanced at him for a moment. When she looked again, this person had already disappeared without a trace. Watch net. 7 K.O.M. After walking for a while, Li Yundong found that someone was missing. He looked back and saw that Ruan Hongling was looking behind him. He asked curiously, Ruan Hongling, what are you looking at? Ruan Hongling turned her head and said with a bewildered expression, I think I saw someone just now. Li Yundong smiled and said, how refreshing. There are so many people here. Don't you see? The little foxes next to him laughed. Ruan Hongling said anxiously, no, I think I saw Chao Yi of the Fox Zen School. What? This time, the little foxes couldn't laugh anymore. Their eyes widened. Sherbua Chao Yi? Where is she? Li Yundong frowned and asked in a deep voice, are you sure? Ruan Hongling hesitated for a moment. Just now, the figure passed by very quickly, so I might not have seen it clearly. But I feel that she looks like Zhuang Yiting. Anyway, their figures are very similar. Zi Yuan knew that this matter was not a trivial matter. Yan Fang was hiding in the dark and spying on the Fox Zen School. This was already a thorn in Li Yundong's heart, making him unable to sleep or eat in peace. Zi Yuan asked seriously, Hongling, this matter can't be vague. Did you see it or not? Ruan Hongling thought about it seriously and said, in fact, I didn't see it clearly, but when I saw this person, she seemed to be deliberately avoiding me. Then when I looked at her back, Chao Yi's name came to my mind subconsciously. Hearing this, everyone felt a chill run down their spines, as if Yan Fang was watching them from some dark corner of this place. Su Chan pulled Li Yundong's sleeve with a frightened face and said, Yundong, did Yan Fang sneak into the Taoist assembly? Zhou Qin, who was lying on his back, said softly, Master, I always feel that this Taoist assembly is a trap. When the little foxes heard this, they were so frightened that they looked around, as if they could not wait to escape from this place in the next second. Zi Yuan pondered for a while and frowned slightly. Wang Zhenyuan wouldn't be so crazy as to use the Taoist assembly as bait, would he? Most of the people who came to the Taoist assembly were masters of the younger generation. Even if they were all killed here, the foundation of the big sects would not be shaken. Because the lifespan of a cultivator was almost infinite, a disciple could be cultivated again after his death. However, if Wang Zhenyuan did this, it would attract the crazy revenge of those hidden senior masters, and the Gazao sect would be destroyed. Although Wang Zhenyuan is ambitious, he is not stupid. Li Yundong also nodded and said, You're right. Zhou Qin, I know what you're thinking. If Wang Zhenyuan wanted to use the Taoist assembly to balance things out, suppress the various sects, and let them fight each other, then his Gazao sect would benefit from it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have incited the cultivators of the various sects again and again. Moreover, I believe that all the cultivators in the world are not fools. They will keep their guard up. Zi Yuan smiled in agreement and said, That's right. I don't believe that Wang Zhenyuan would have the guts to set up a trap. Li Yundong patted the little girl's head and said with a smile, I'm here. Don't worry. Even if it's a trap, they can't do anything to me. Su Chan looked at the boy in front of her with infatuation. When she first met him, he was just a little boy who didn't know anything about cultivation. But now, he had grown into an indomitable master. As long as he was in front of her, even if the sky fell down, she didn't need to be afraid. The little girl nodded heavily and looked at Li Yundong with great admiration and dependence. She said with a smile, Yes, my Yundong is now a great master. Even if there are tricks, you won't be afraid, right? Li Yundong laughed and said, This is what it means to be strong enough to defeat 10 people. In the face of true strength, all schemes and tricks were useless. It's fine if Yan Fang doesn't come, but if she does, I'll make sure she won't be able to return." When the little foxes of the Fox Zen school heard this, their uneasy hearts immediately relaxed. They chattered one after another, "Yes, leader is here. There's nothing to be afraid of." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Let's go. Don't delay here. Everyone, just pay more attention later." The group of people walked through the long corridor and followed the sound of pingtan. After walking for about 10 meters, they stopped in front of a small 2-story building. Li Yundong took a look and saw that it was an ancient building with flying eaves and black tiles and white walls. On the 4 eaves of the first and second floors stood 4 divine beasts, namely the azure dragon, the white tiger, the vermilion bird, and the black tortoise. Under the 4 divine beasts, there was a bell hanging. When the breeze blew, it made a crisp sound, which was particularly pleasant to the ear in the soft and pleasant sound of pingtan. Li Yundong looked around and saw that although the courtyard in front of the building was not big, there were lakes, stones, and rockery. Moreover, the shape was lifelike, the structure was rigorous, and the levels were clear. At first glance, he could tell that it had been designed by a master. The rarest thing was that along the way, Li Yundong didn't find the slightest similarity in the scenery. There were really mountain paths, caves, valleys, dangerous roads, and cliffs all over the rockery. It was really a feeling of looking at all sides of the mountain, and the scenery changed step by step. Li Yundong couldn't help but praise with a smile, "Even if there is a trap here, the person who designed it is also an elegant person." After that, he walked inside with the girls. As soon as he entered the door, he saw 2 couplets. The first one was, "The hills and ravines are in the chest. Looking at the stacked stones and sparse springs, there is a natural painting book." The second one was, "Under the garden, I am willing to carry a zither and wine, and travel outside." Li Yundong couldn't help but cheer, "Good couplet, good couplet." His voice was so loud that Wang Zhenyuan, who was upstairs, heard it and went downstairs. He cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Zhenrenli, there are better couplets upstairs. Please come in." Li Yundong chuckled, cupped his hands to Wang Zhenyuan, and said, "Master Wan, you are so elegant. Why didn't you choose this place for the Taoist assembly earlier?" Sect Master Wan chuckled and said in a low voice, "Good treasures are always hidden and not willing to take them out." After that, he winked at Li Yundong and said, "You'll know when you go up and have a look later." Li Yundong was curious. He stepped upstairs and saw that it was already full of friends. They were all cultivators from various sects on the yacht. These cultivators were all focused in one direction. Some closed their eyes and shook their heads, looking intoxicated. Some nodded slightly with a smile on their faces, but none of them looked at Li Yundong. Li Yundong was surprised. He followed everyone's gaze and saw 2 women sitting upstairs. One of them was about 30 years old, wearing a purple cheongsam with gold rims and holding a sanxian in her hand. Her face was profile, and her appearance was quite good. Sitting next to her was a young woman, whose face was blocked. She was wearing a crisp cyan cheongsam with floral patterns and holding a pipa in her arms. She was playing it slowly. Li Yundong heard that her voice was clear and soft, and her Wunong soft language was pleasant to listen to. When it was clear, it sounded like the chirping of a white spirit in the mountains, lingering for 3 days. When it was soft, it sounded like honey making wine. It was so sweet that every pore of his seemed to have a sweet and soft feeling. Li Yundong was stunned. He looked back and saw that Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others were also listening to the song in a daze. No one urged him to go forward. Li Yundong couldn't help but be curious. Which famous master is singing pingtan? Why is she singing so well? Although he couldn't understand the Wunong soft language, he could vaguely feel a kind of delicate feeling when he listened to her singing. I wonder what this woman looks like since her voice is so beautiful. He couldn't help but walk upstairs quickly and stretch out his head to take a look. At first glance, he saw that the girl was about 16 or 17 years old. She was extremely beautiful, not inferior to Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin. What was even rarer was that the girl had red lips and white teeth. She was delicate and pretty, and her eyes were like a clear spring flowing down from a mountain stream. It made people feel comfortable as if they were drinking fine wine, but there was no evil thought in their hearts. Li Yundong saw this and was secretly amazed. He turned his head and said to Su Chan and the others, who were listening in a daze, "Hey, how long are you going to stand on the stairs?" Only then did Su Chan and the others wake up from a dream. They followed Li Yundong up and sat in their seats. At this time, the cultivators at the next table noticed the arrival of Li Yundong and the others, but they only glanced at Li Yundong a few times before quickly looking away and listening to the girl continue to sing. After Li Yundong sat down, he looked at the two women who were singing Pingtan seriously. He saw that the woman holding the sanxian had thick makeup on her face, and her eyebrows were full of beauty. The girl next to her had a pair of bright pearl earrings on her ears and a pair of jade bracelets on her hands. When she plucked the strings of the zither with her fingers, the bracelets danced brightly, like a faint green afterimage, which was very beautiful. After listening for a while, Li Yundong suddenly found that Su Chan and the other little foxes of the Fox Zen school looked unhappy, so he whispered to Su Chan, "What's wrong?" Su Chan whispered to Li Yundong with a look of displeasure, "I don't like it." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Why? Do you think she's beautiful and sings well?" Su Chan said angrily, "No, she's singing the investiture of the gods. It happens to be the part where Jiang Taigong subdued Daji and subdued demons." Li Yundong said curiously, "No way. Is it such a coincidence? It's quite appropriate. It just so happens that you have a group of little vixens here." Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong and said, "You're so annoying. I don't like people calling me a vixen. Aren't we wronged? We didn't seduce anyone. Why do we have to bear this infamy?" Li Yundong moved closer to Su Chan's ear and whispered with a smile, "But you are a charming little vixen. I love you so much." Su Chan's ear was tickled by Li Yundong's breath. She giggled and said, "You're so annoying. Just now you were acting like a great cultivator, but now you're acting like a little hooligan. Don't you know where you are and who are around you? How embarrassing it is to be seen by others." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Fool, I just want you to know that don't think too much. With me here, you don't need to think about what others think. If someone dares to kill you, I'll kill him first." Hearing this, Su Chan's heart warmed and she smiled sweetly at Li Yundong. The two of them were talking intimately as if there was no one else around, but suddenly, they heard the thunderous applause in the small building. The girl had finished singing. Only then did Li Yundong look at the stage and see the young girl standing up with the pipa in her arms. Her posture was really graceful and graceful. She smiled shyly at the crowd, then turned around and went into the back room. After the girl entered the dressing room in the back room, the smile on her face immediately disappeared. She looked around vigilantly, then turned around and walked out of the back door of the back room. She came to a remote corner and whispered, "Master, Master? Are you there?" "They're here." At this time, a person walked out of the corner. Her figure was hidden in the shadows, and her face could not be seen clearly. However, the voice of a woman could be heard. She said coldly, "Are they all here?" The girl nodded, and there was a hint of fear between her brows. She said softly, "Yes, they're all here." The woman snorted and said, "That's great. I've been planning for 9 years, and this day has finally come. Today, I'm going to wipe out the Fox Zen school and let all the cultivators in the world know the true colors of these vixens. I'll get up in the morning to make up for it. I'm really sleepy. I haven't slept well for a few days. I feel very uncomfortable. Sorry. Chapter 491. Go to watch net. After the cultivators in the small building waited for the woman who sang to leave, they did not come to their senses for a while, as if their ears were still echoing with the moving singing. After a long time, they sighed and said, "It's true that this song only exists in heaven. How many times can we hear it in the human world? Well sung, well sung." Li Yundong also comforted Su Chan with a smile, "Maybe it's just a coincidence. It's not something that can be targeted at you." Su Chan propped her hands on the table and rested her chin in her palms. She pouted and said, "Maybe. Anyway, it sounds harsh to my ears." Watch net. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Really? I feel that this little song calms my heart. The murderous intent and bloody smell of the previous Taoist assembly have been diluted a lot." Su Chan suddenly smiled and whispered to Li Yundong, "Yundong, shall I go up and sing for you?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "No way, here. By the way, you said you could sing a song. But how do you know how to sing Ping Tan?" Su Chan said with a smile, "My master taught me." She knew a lot of things. There was nothing in the world that she couldn't do. Moreover, I lived in Dongwu City with my master for a while, so I learned the dialect here and some Ping Tan. Yundong, you have to listen to me sing for you when you go back. You have to." Li Yunyang laughed. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Wang Zhenyuan cupping his hands to the cultivators of the various sects and saying, "Everyone. I'm really sorry for what happened at the Taoist assembly. I, Wang Zhenyuan, would like to apologize to everyone here." The cultivators of the various sects laughed. Someone said loudly, "Master Wan, you should have brought us to such a good place a long time ago." "That's right, sect leader Wan. Seeing that your place is not bad and much better than that broken yacht, we'll forgive you." "Sect leader Wan, you're not kind at all, keeping a mistress in your house. These two beauties, one big and one small, must have. Among them, Dang Chong's voice was the loudest. He said loudly, "Sect Master Wan, call that little girl out again. At least let us know her name." Someone next to him immediately made fun of him and said, "Dang Chong, do you want to eat the cradle?" Dang Chong rubbed his head and said loudly, "Am I that old? Look at me. I haven't even had a single strand of white hair. How am I old?" Everyone looked at Dang Chong's bald head and laughed. "Dang Chong, you don't have a single hair on your head." Someone laughed loudly and said, "Dang Chong, when you took off all your clothes just now, I saw that the hair down there was white." When everyone heard this, they burst into laughter. Li Yundong was listening to them with a smile, but when he heard this, he almost spat out a mouthful of tea. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Aren't these people too rude? Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, suddenly pursed her lips and said with a smile, "Master, you used to be much rougher than them." Li Yundong pretended to be surprised. "Really? How thick is it?" This sentence had a double meaning, and Zhou Qin's cheeks immediately turned red. She muttered in a low voice, "I said you were fat, and you really did it. You're so annoying." Su Chan, Ruan Hongling, and the little foxes all laughed. Zi Yuan was also quite smiling. She said, "You are now only one step away from becoming a great cultivator. Naturally, you can't be as careless as before. Moreover, cultivation is about cultivating your body and qi. If you are still the same as before, then your kung fu will be in vain." Li Yundong said to Zhou Qin with a smile, "Did you see that? Zi Yuan is so kind. How can your disciple ruin my show in public?" While they were talking, they saw Dang Chang arguing with someone about the color of his hair. A cultivator laughed loudly and said, "Dang Chang, don't make trouble. We are still waiting to listen to a little song." "That's right. Master Wan, call the little girl up and sing another song. I haven't heard such a beautiful song for a long time." Wan Zhenyuan laughed and said, "Everyone, please excuse me. If you want to listen to a little song, of course you can. However, do we still have to fight? Or should we have a duel and sing a song?" Everyone burst into laughter, and for a moment, the hostility of all the sects dissipated a lot. Wan Zhenyuan glanced at Li Yundong and Yu Sheng and said with a smile, Zhenren Yu, please?" Yu Sheng stood up expressionlessly, walked into the field, and cupped his hands to Li Yundong. Zhenren Yu, shall we have a competition?" Li Yundong chuckled. He looked around and said, "Zhenren Yu, look at the narrow space upstairs, and there is a lot of antique furniture. If we fight, I'm afraid this building will be destroyed. This place is so quiet and elegant. It would be a pity to destroy it. Moreover, it would ruin the scenery if we fought. I think it would be better for us to sit and fight. What do you think?" Yu Sheng was stunned and asked, "How can we fight while sitting?" Li Yundong stood up, cupped his hands to Wan Zhenyuan, and said with a smile, "Master Wan, please make an empty table." Wan Zhenyuan smiled and said, "No problem." After that, he ordered his subordinates to vacate a table in the center of the field. Li Yundong walked to the table and said to Yu Sheng with a smile, "Zhenren Yu, we agreed to fight with our yang spirit bodies, but since we are yang spirit bodies, we can change a lot. Why don't we use this table as a spirit space? The two of us can use our yang spirits and fight on the table?" Yu Sheng also walked to the table and asked in confusion, "How do we fight?" Li Yundong chuckled and said, "The yang spirit can change at will. Let's see whose change is more subtle and whose is more powerful. What do you think?" Yu Sheng thought for a moment and said decisively, "Okay. Let's do as you say." Li Yundong smiled slightly. He didn't move, but soon a palm-sized little man jumped out of the Baihui acupoint on the top of his head. This little man was like a miniature version of Li Yundong, looking at everyone with a smile on the table. Yu Sheng also remained calm. He quickly controlled his yang spirit body to turn into a little man and jumped onto the table. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Zhenren Yu, why don't you go first?" Yu Sheng didn't stand on ceremony. He immediately turned his yang spirit into a white tiger. Although this tiger was small, the character, Wang, on its forehead was prominent, and its mane was majestic. No one dared to look down on it. Li Yundong smiled and said, "What a white tiger. Watch me." As he spoke, Li Yundong controlled the yang spirit to turn into an azure dragon and fight with Yu Sheng's white tiger. At this time, all the cultivators present were staring at the yang spirit of the two people fighting on the table. Even the woman who had been singing before and the girl who had returned at some point were looking up curiously. Zi Yuan, who was standing by the side of the field, saw Zhou Qin looking at the table in confusion, as if she didn't understand the mystery of this battle. She explained with a smile, "Zhou Qin, do you remember that Erlangshan fought with the great sage, equal to heaven in the journey to the west?" Zhou Qin's heart skipped a beat and she asked tentatively, could it be that the two of them kept changing, and then Erlangshan caught Sun Wukong? Zi Yuan nodded and said with a smile, "Exactly. The battle between Li Yundong and Yu Sheng is a competition of the changes of their yang spirits, to see who can change more and whose ability to change is more powerful. This battle doesn't seem to be as intense as the previous ones, but the consumption of Jinqi and effort is far greater than that of the previous ones. Moreover, look at this scene, Yu Sheng has transformed into a white tiger, while Li Yundong has chosen to transform into an azure dragon. The white tiger is the earth, and the azure dragon is the sky. Since ancient times, the sky has been greater than the earth, and the azure dragon is also ranked above the white tiger. Therefore, Li Yundong's transformation can suppress Yusheng. As she spoke, Yusheng's white tiger fought with Li Yundong's azure dragon for a while and gradually lost its strength. Yusheng frowned, and the white tiger immediately jumped out of the battle. It shook its body and turned into a burly man. This man was as muscular as a strong man, with a bare chest and exposed abdomen, wings on his back, 3 eyes on his forehead, but his face was red like a monkey's. His feet were like an eagle's, his left hand was holding a wedge, and his right hand was holding an awl. He hit the huge drum hanging from his waist and abdomen with both hands. There was a loud crack on the table, and a small bolt of lightning struck down toward the azure dragon transformed from Li Yundong's yang spirit. Zi Yuan was shocked. This is Thunder God. Yusheng's yang spirit is really powerful. What a good transformation. Zhou Qin asked curiously, can Thunder God suppress the azure dragon? Zi Yuan smiled and said, of course. The azure dragon is just a divine beast, while the Thunder God is a god. Divine beasts are divine beasts, and the gods are in front of the beasts. Therefore, when the gods appear, all divine beasts have to surrender. Moreover, since ancient times, which divine beast has not been the mount of the immortals? Zhou Qin asked anxiously, Master, will you also become a god? Zi Yuan shook her head and said with a smile, then it will become a head-on fight again. There is rarely a difference between the gods. If you want to determine who is stronger, you can only fight head-on. Both of them are masters. If they really fight, I'm afraid this building will not be able to survive. As the two of them were talking, Li Yundong suddenly shook his body. The azure dragon instantly turned into a small earthworm and drilled into the table. Zi Yuan immediately nodded slightly and praised, not bad, Li Yundong really has the demeanor of a great cultivator. Zhou Qin said curiously, Master, you've been so aggrieved that you've turned into an earthworm. How can you still have the demeanor of a great cultivator? Zi Yuan smiled and said, what is a dragon? Dragons can soar above the 9th heaven, but they can also hide under the 9th earth. Although the Thunder God is powerful, the art of thunder and lightning can't hit the earthworm hiding under the ground. All things in the world reinforce and restrain each other, and one thing subdues another. When Yusheng saw that all the thunder and lightning from his Thunder God had failed, he snorted and immediately turned the Thunder God into a rooster. He lowered his head and pecked at Li Yundong, who was hiding on the table with his hard beak. Unexpectedly, when he pecked out, Li Yundong had turned from an earthworm into a big python in the blink of an eye, tightly entangling the rooster. Yusheng's reaction was extremely fast. He immediately turned into a civet and turned around to bite Li Yundong. Everyone saw that Li Yundong and Yusheng were changing constantly. Almost every change would not last more than 5 seconds. Sometimes, they would even change several times in a row in the blink of an eye, which was too much for their eyes to take in and they couldn't react. Everyone present stared at the table with their eyes wide open, for fear of missing any changes. Even Wang Zhenyuan looked at the field with a shocked expression. He thought to himself, this Yusheng is really powerful. No wonder he is known as the best of the younger generation of the Chuanjin dragon sect. But why is Li Yundong's yang spirit also so powerful? He's young and hasn't cultivated for long. How on earth did he cultivate? While he was muttering to himself, he saw a subordinate come over and whisper a few words in his ear. Wang Zhenyuan glanced at him unhappily, blaming him for disturbing him from watching such a wonderful, intense, and unique battle. But when he heard the words of his subordinate, he was stunned and couldn't help asking, are they foreigners? They want to watch our Taoist assembly? The subordinate nodded and said, yes, that's what they said. Wang Zhenyuan waved his hand impatiently and said, no, I don't care how they know about the Taoist assembly, but foreigners can't come. But as he spoke, he heard footsteps coming from the stairwell, and 3 people came up unhurriedly from downstairs. The one in the lead was an innocent and pretty little girl dressed in a gorgeous kimono. Behind her was a short old man with a pale face. Behind the old man was a tall young man with a docile face. These 3 people were none other than Xinyan, Shinsu, and Tachibana Wakako from the Shingon Tantrism of Mount Koya in Japan. This was the update from yesterday. Chapter 492. Go to watch net. When Wang Zhenyuan saw Xinyan and the others, he was stunned. Although he was unhappy, he still stepped forward politely and asked, "I'm Wang Zhenyuan, the sect leader of the Gazao sect. Why have you come uninvited?" Xinyan also put his palms together politely, bowed in standard and fluent Chinese, and said, "Amitba, I'm Xinyan from the Shingon Tantrism of Mount Koya, Japan. This time, I brought my disciples Shinsu and Tachibana Wakako to the Cold Mountain Temple in Dongwu City to pay homage to the founder of our Shingon Tantrism, Master Hirofa. I heard that the quadrennial Taoist Assembly of China will be held here, so I specially came to pay a visit." Wang Zhenyuan said calmly, "Master Xinyan, Buddhism and Taoism are 2 different schools. Your Shingon Tantrism has come to our Taoist assembly uninvited. I'm afraid it's not appropriate, right?" Xinyan chuckled. "Of course not. Although Buddhism and Taoism were 2 different schools, Buddhism and Taoism cultivation were indeed of the same origin. I once heard that the leader of the Gazao sect, the leader of the external alchemy sect in mainland China, is a righteous and wise cultivation leader. I think Master Wan, you should understand this, right?" When Wang Zhenyuan saw that Xinyan had given him a big hat, he was very happy and felt proud. But when he looked around, he saw that the attention of many cultivators had been attracted. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should let the 3 Japanese come up. Watch net. 7 KOM. At this time, Xinyan sighed, touched Tachibana Wakako beside him, and said, "Look, Tachibana Wakako, I told you that they wouldn't agree, right? I told you that there are many hidden dragons and crouching tigers in China, and cultivation is the best in the world. The rules of each sect are very strict, especially at this kind of Taoist assembly. Outsiders are not allowed to enter. You didn't believe me, so you insisted on coming. Now look at you, you've been given the cold shoulder, haven't you?" Tachibana Wakako also understood Chinese. At this time, her eyes were wide open, and her dark eyes were full of surprise and grievance. She pouted and muttered in her heart, "It's true that I clamored to come. But you didn't say that cultivation in China is the best in the world." When Wang Zhenyuan heard this, he saw that the little girl was looking at Xinyan and then at him. He suddenly smiled, nodded, and said, "What Master Xinyan said makes sense. What's more, the sage once said, it's a pleasure to have friends from afar. Since the 3 of you came all the way here because of its reputation, we, the Great China, should not be lacking in etiquette. However, the 3 of you must abide by the rules and watch the battle from the sidelines." When Tachibana Wakako heard this, she was overjoyed. She bowed deeply to Wang Zhenyuan and said, "Thank you very much. I've troubled you." Xinyan also smiled and saluted Wang Zhenyuan, saying, "Thank you for making an exception, Master Wan. If you come to our Mount Koya as a guest in the future, I will definitely entertain you warmly." Wang Zhenyuan chuckled and ordered his subordinates to lead the 3 of them to a table and sit down. At this time, Xinyan, Shinsu, and Tachibana Wakako happened to sit down at Li Yunyang's table. As soon as they sat down, Tachibana Wakako said to Xinyan in Japanese with an unhappy face, "Master Xinyan, how can you wrongly accuse me? I'm not the only one who said I would come to the Taoist assembly. Moreover, as a monk, you are dishonest and you lie. When did you say that cultivation in China is the best in the world? Xinyan laughed. He was not angry. He just patted the innocent Tachibana Wakako's head and said with a smile, Tachibana Wakako, you saw it. These cultivators in China don't have much ability, but they have a bad temper. They have been immersed in the beautiful dream of their own country and the most glorious history of Taoism in the Song, Yuan Ming and Ming dynasties. So when I give them a little bit of praise, they get carried away. If I didn't compliment them, would they have let us in? Only then did Tachibana Wakako understand. She made a face at Xinyan with a smile and whispered, Master Xinyan, you're so amazing. You've deceived these self-righteous Chinese cultivators. Xinyan snorted, waved his hand, and said, if it weren't for you, how could I have done such a thing? Tachibana Wakako, didn't you want to watch the Taoist assembly fight? Now you can watch as much as you want. Tachibana Wakako looked at the field and saw that Li Yunyang and Yu Sheng were both sitting at a square table at this time. There were their own yang spirits on the table, constantly changing. Sometimes they were fighting and wrestling, and sometimes they were chasing each other for their lives. Tachibana Wakako was a child, and she was delighted to see the prey. She turned to Shinshu and said with a smile, Shinshu, that guy is the guy we met at Shiyuan Temple. What do you think of his ability? Shinshu glanced at the field, quickly lowered his eyes, and said with a faint expression, I'm not interested. Tachibana Wakako pouted and said, you're so annoying. I think it's very interesting. After that, she ignored Shinshu and began to watch with great interest. At this time, Su Chan, Zhou Qin, Zi Yuan, and the little foxes, who were sitting to one side, heard them talking in Japanese. They all turned their heads to look at them. Su Chan muttered in a low voice, why are there Japanese here? Yuan Hongling also whispered to Zi Yuan, Shiji Zi Yuan, what are they talking about? Zi Yuan looked a little displeased. She gave Xinyan a meaningful look and said in a low voice, nothing. Let's ignore them and continue to watch Li Yunyang and Yusheng fight. Only then did everyone turn their faces and continue to look at the field. At this time, the battle between Li Yunyang and Yusheng had become white-hot. The two of them were controlling their respective yang spirits to constantly change according to each other's changes. Every time the two of them changed, they would immediately change again. In just a few minutes, the round table had changed dozens of times. The change of the yang spirit consumed a lot of zhenqi. Not long after the two of them fought, white steam rose from the top of their heads. Yusheng's forehead was already covered with fine sweat and his face was pale, while Li Yunyang's face was red, as if he had drunk strong wine. At first, the changes of the two of them were extremely fast, but slowly, Yusheng's changes slowed down. His face also became paler and paler, gradually becoming as pale as a thin piece of paper, while Li Yundong's face became redder and redder, like a red-faced Guan Yu. Although his appearance was abnormal, his eyes were still crystal clear and deep, like the endless sea. There was still inexhaustible energy left. Not only did his changes not slow down, they even showed signs of speeding up. When everyone saw this, they were secretly shocked. In the first battle, Li Yundong and Chen Yunyan were competing in controlling thunder, which was a competition of the explosive power of zhenqi. In the second battle, Li Yundong and Sun Baidian were competing in the five elements, which was a competition of the subtle control of zhenqi. In the third battle, Li Yundong and Yusheng were competing in the changes of the yang spirit, which was a competition of the endurance of zhenqi. Li Yundong had fought 3 battles in a row, and his explosive power and control had reached an abnormal level. How could his endurance be so strong and his zhenqi so deep? Tachibana Wakako, who was on the sidelines, saw that Li Yundong and Yusheng looked different. She couldn't help asking curiously, Master Xinyan, why is one of them red and the other white? It's like they're singing an opera. Xinyan chuckled and said, the white face is pale because the jinqi in his body has been consumed too much. As for the red face, it's because the jinqi in his body is running too fast and too vigorously. Tachibana Wakako asked in confusion, then why? Xinyan knew that although Tachibana Wakako was also a cultivator, she practiced witchcraft and the art of god possession. She relied on the powerful power of ghosts and gods brought to herself through faith and contract. This was completely different from the cultivation methods of the cultivators in mainland China, so she couldn't understand these cultivation techniques at all. Xinyan explained with a smile, the cultivation techniques of Chinese Taoism are different from those of Arjunyan Tantrism. They cultivate essence, qi, and blood, refining the three essences of the human body into jinqi through a special method of qi circulation. Because the white face has consumed too much jinqi, he has to desperately mobilize the essence, qi, and blood in his body and quickly transform these three essences into jinqi to ensure that he can persist in the battle. But he's drinking poison to quench his thirst. He can't hold on for a long time. The essence, qi, and blood in his body are greatly damaged, so his face is pale. As he spoke, Xinyan pointed to Li Yundong and said, look at this red face. It's because the jinqi in his body is too majestic that his face is too red. Tachibana Wakako seemed to understand and said, will running jinqi too fast cause one's face to turn red? Xinyan nodded and said, yes, because jinqi is very illusory. It exists in the meridians of the human body, but its transportation and mobilization are driven by qi and blood. And blood is mobilized by qi. Qi and blood are the commander of blood. To mobilize jinqi, one must first circulate qi. After that, it will drive the speed of the blood flow in the body and mobilize jinqi. When the speed of the jinqi reaches a certain intensity and height, the speed of the blood flow in the human body will become faster and faster, and his skin will become redder and redder. Tachibana Wakako suddenly understood and said, ah, I see. Is it the same as running a marathon? Xinyan nodded slightly and said, although it's not correct, it's not far from the truth. Tachibana Wakako clapped her hands and said with a smile, then won't this battle be over soon? Xinyan chuckled and said, if I'm not wrong, the winner will be decided in 10 seconds. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw that Yusheng finally couldn't hold on any longer. His last transformation happened to be into a white tiger, and Li Yundong immediately changed into an azure dragon. At this time, Yusheng's jinqi was almost exhausted, and he could no longer change. Yusheng's jinqi was seriously overdrawn. His body swayed, and his lips were a little dry. He forced a smile at Li Yundong and said in a hoarse voice, Jinrenli, I admit defeat. Li Yundong also smiled slightly and withdrew his yang spirit. He chuckled and said, Jinren, you're too modest. Yusheng waved his hand. After withdrawing his yang spirit, he took a deep breath and slowly adjusted his qi. After a little breath, he asked, Jinrenli, there's something I don't understand and I want to ask you. Li Yundong saw that although Yusheng was arrogant, he was still an open and above-board person. He was not like the previous two who had many tricks. He had a good impression of Yusheng, so he said with a smile, Jinren, ask away. Yusheng asked with a surprised and doubtful expression, Jinrenli, just now I changed 108 times, and you also changed 108 times. I want to ask you, if I don't admit defeat, how many more times can you change? Li Yundong smiled and controlled his yang spirit to jump onto the table again. Without saying a word, he began to change again. This time, he clearly changed the things that had changed when they had fought before. In the end, he said with a smile, Jinren, I can change things like this for 3 days and 3 nights. When these words were said, the cultivators of all sects present were so shocked that their faces turned pale. Yusheng was also a master in the cultivation world. When he competed with Li Yundong in the Yang spirit transformation, he could only last for 5 minutes before his Zhenyuan was exhausted. But Li Yundong actually said that he could last for 3 days and 3 nights? Was this true or false? Even if it was a lie, it didn't seem like it was a lie from the way he was getting more and more spirited the more he fought. But if it was true, then he was too terrifying, wasn't he? He had thought that he would run out of his Jinqi and get a bargain in the end. Now it seemed that this was simply a fool's dream. For a moment, everyone had their own thoughts. Du Fei of the Chuanjin dragon sect drank his tea calmly, but his heart was in turmoil. He thought to himself, Li Yundong has only cultivated for half a year. I can understand that his Jinqi is strong. After all, he is a body reconstructed by the Jin Dan. I can also understand that his magic is amazing. Maybe he has had some adventures. But his Jinqi is so strong and his aura is so long that his Yang spirit transformation can last for 3 days and 3 nights. This shows that he has reached the realm of unity of heaven and man and self-sufficiency of the big and small universes. He is only 1 step away from the Jinshan phase. How could he be so powerful at such a young age? He must have practiced the long-lost heavenly Jin Dan technique. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to be so powerful. Seeing Li Yundong's miracle, Du Fei couldn't help but begin to think about how to exchange the heavenly Jin Dan technique with Li Yundong. Although Zhou Ping of the Zhengyi school had always disliked Li Yundong, she couldn't help exclaiming in a low voice, 3 days and 3 nights? How is this possible? How can his aura be so long? Zhang Ling snorted coldly and said, this man must have practiced the heavenly Jin Dan technique and combined it with Renyuan Jin Dan. That's why he is so powerful. Master, I have a way to get the heavenly Jin Dan technique. Zhou Ping turned her head and whispered a few words into Zhang Ling's ear. Hearing this, Zhang Ling narrowed her eyes and revealed a thoughtful expression. She slowly said, we'll talk about this when we get back. We need to make a good plan. Wang Zhenyuan saw that after this battle, the faces of the cultivators of all sects could not help but show fear and despair. Li Yundong's strength had far exceeded everyone's expectations. It was not terrible for a person to have powerful magic, nor was it terrible for a person to be proficient in the 5 elements. However, if a person's magic was powerful and proficient in the 5 elements, his Jinqi was incomparably majestic, and his aura was long and continuous, like a vast river that would never dry up, then this person was simply an unbeatable monster. Wang Zhenyuan looked at Li Yunyang in shock and thought to himself, this guy's cultivation speed is too fast. His current cultivation quotient has far surpassed that of cultivators of the same age. He's almost catching up with the old guys in the cultivation world. Terrible, really terrible. Can the old fox really control such a terrible guy? At this time, Yu Sheng smiled bitterly. He made an obeisance by cupping his hands to Li Yundong and said, Zhenrenli, I'm convinced. You are powerful, and I'm not as good as you. But just because I'm not as good as you today doesn't mean that I won't be as good as you tomorrow. One day, I will surpass you. Li Yundong smiled slightly. Zhenren, you're exaggerating. Yu Sheng forced a smile and walked to his seat. He lowered his head and said nothing. No matter how Wei Qing, who was next to him, teased him and made him happy, he did not say a word. Seeing that Yu Sheng, who was usually arrogant, had been defeated like this, Wang Zhenyuan couldn't help but smile bitterly. He cupped one hand in the other before his chest and said to the cultivators of the other sects, everyone, who else wants to fight? At this moment, how could any cultivator dare to step forward? All of them were fearful, and their eyes were evasive. Seeing this, Wang Zhenyuan could only smile bitterly and say, everyone, if no one comes up, I can only announce that Zhenrenli has won. Ding Nan, who was sitting in the corner, said to Zheng Yuan in a low voice, Master, do you still want to fight with Li Yundong? He's so strong. Zheng Yuan chuckled and a sinister smile appeared on his face. He whispered, if I want to defeat him, I don't need to fight at all. Look at my... As he spoke, he was about to stand up. However, he had just moved when he suddenly saw someone suddenly stand up and shout, wait a moment. I have something to say. 8. Yeah. Chapter 493. Go to watch net. Everyone looked in the direction of the voice and saw that it was Zhang Cuni of the Qingqing sect who was speaking. Go to watch net. Zheng Yuan, who had wanted to make things difficult for him, was stunned for a moment. He sat down again and wanted to see what Zhang Cuni wanted to say. Zhang Cuni stood up, cupped his hands to Li Yundong, and said, Zhenrenli, there's one thing I don't understand. I want to ask you for advice. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, Zhenren Zhang, if you have something to say, please say it. Zhang Cuni said loudly, I want to ask you, Zhenrenli, do you think this immortal pen is a powerful magical weapon of our Taoism? Li Yundong was stunned. He didn't know what Zhang Cuni's words meant. He said, Zhenren Zhang, the immortal pen is the personal magical weapon of Wuxia, the founder of our Taoist Danding sect. Of course, it's a great magical weapon. Zhang Cuni nodded and asked again, does such a powerful magical weapon have earth-shattering power? Li Yundong became more and more confused. This powerful magical weapon can write talismans out of thin air. Of course, it has earth-shattering power. Zhenren Zhang, what do you mean by asking this? Zhang Cuni turned a deaf ear to Li Yundong's question. He said again, Zhenrenli, I want to ask you, if such a powerful magical weapon falls into the hands of evil people, what should we do? Li Yundi raised his eyebrows and said, then we righteous people should naturally enforce justice on behalf of heaven and take back our Taoist powerful magical weapon. Such a powerful magical weapon must not fall into the hands of evil people. Zhang Cuni asked again, but this person is too strong. What if we can't beat him? Although Li Yundong felt strange in his heart, he thought that he had a clear conscience in his life, so he said loudly, what are you talking about? Do we have to bow our heads if the evil forces are too strong? If one of us can't beat him, two of us can do it. If two of us can't beat him, we can do it together. We can't let the world become a place where evil people run rampant and good people are bullied, can we? Zhang Cuni laughed. He pointed at Li Yundong and said loudly, Zhenrenli, I advise you not to get this immortal pen. Li Yundong was stunned. What do you mean? Zhang Cuni sneered and said, otherwise, you will become the villain that everyone will attack. Although Li Yundong had stayed in the spirit space for many years and his temper had almost been worn out, when he heard someone accusing him out of nothing, he couldn't help but get angry. He glared at him and said angrily, Zhenren Zhang, don't slander me. Slander? Zhang Cuni snorted coldly. He turned around and shouted to the cultivators of all sects present, you can be witnesses here and let us see the true face of this evil man. At this time, everyone was stunned. They didn't expect that Zhang Cuni would suddenly attack and accuse Li Yundong of being a big villain. They immediately perked up. They widened their eyes and pricked up their ears to listen. A cultivator who was eager to see the world in chaos said loudly, Zhenren Zhang, tell us quickly. We are listening. That's right, what's going on? Zhang Cuni snorted and asked Li Yundong loudly, Zhenrenli, did you open a tea house on the pedestrian street of Tiannan City? Li Yundong felt strange. He nodded and said, yes, the whole cultivation world should know about this. Why are you asking me? Zhang Cuni sneered and said, yes, everyone in the cultivation world knows that you have opened a tea house on the pedestrian street of Tiannan City, but how many cultivators in the world know that your tea house is actually a black shop that makes a living by swindling and bullying people? When everyone heard this, there was an uproar and they all looked at Li Yundong in surprise. When Su Chan heard this, there was a buzzing sound in her head. She couldn't help but open her mouth wide, and a messy voice in her head shouted, "Oh no, that matter has really caused trouble for Yundong. What should I do? What should I do?" The little foxes were also dumbfounded. They looked at each other in horror and fear, and all of them were trembling. When Li Yundong heard this, he was shocked at first, and then he became angry. He shouted, "Zhang Cuni, make it clear, or you won't be able to get away with it today." Zhang Cuni sneered and said, "Jinrenli, don't you dare to admit what you've done." As he said this, he turned around and loudly told the crowd about how his uncle had been robbed in the Desanxian tea house. He gritted his teeth and said loudly with a face full of hatred, "Fellow Taoists, Jinren. I think everyone knows that when Jinrenli opened the Desanxian tea house a month ago, it was really vigorous and lively. How many high-ranking officials and prominent people came? I, Zhang Cuni, still remember it vividly. Even the inauguration ceremony of the leader of our Qingyang Palace didn't have so many high-ranking officials and nobles. But when Li Yundong opened a small tea house, so many people came. How powerful and amazing is this?" His words were the opposite of the truth. For a moment, everyone whispered to each other and said, "Yes, even the secretary of the provincial party committee came that day. This is a big deal." Well, it's true. Li Yundong's power is not small. Zhang Cuni's tone changed and he sneered. But Jinrenli doesn't use his power for the right way. Instead, he only wants to take the crooked way and the unorthodox way. Jinrenli, are you relying on your powerful background and power to act so recklessly and persecute the people? At this time, everyone looked at Li Yundong with unkind eyes. Originally, they were afraid of Li Yundong because he was too strong. At this time, they finally found an excuse and a place to vent. The emotions hidden in their hearts suddenly broke out. Everyone shouted, "This scum is really a shame to our cultivation world. Kill him. Justice for heaven. Hey, can you kill him? I can't do it alone. There are so many people here, right? Forget it. It's better for you to die than for me. If you want to be cannon fodder, I won't accompany you." There were also some old and prudent cultivators who said to Li Yundong loudly, "Jinrenli, is that true? Jinrenli, say something." Wang Jinyuan saw that the situation on the scene had suddenly changed. The situation had changed from one side to the other. This was not what Wang Jinyuan wanted to see. He had to stand up and say loudly, "Don't quarrel, everyone. I believe that Jinrenli will give us an explanation." After that, he said to Li Yundong, "Jinrenli, whether this matter is true or not, I think you should say something." At this time, there was no joy or anger on Li Yundong's face, but he was shocked and angry in his heart. He had never thought that he would encounter such a thing on such an occasion. Moreover, he had heard the details clearly from Zhang Cuni, and the time matched. According to his understanding of Su Chan, this little girl could indeed do such a thing. He had already believed half of it in his heart. Li Yundong turned his head to look at his table, only to see that Su Chan was looking at him with a look of panic. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He knew that this matter must be true. Zheng Yuan, who was not far away, observed their expressions. He chuckled and whispered to Ding Nan, "Hey, Zhang Cuni seems to have a rough temper, but I didn't expect him to be so meticulous. He happens to be the same as me. I thought I was the only one who had collected these things." Ding Nan suppressed the worry in her heart and asked, "But there's no evidence for this kind of thing. How can it be counted without evidence?" Zheng Yuan chuckled and said, "No evidence? I have a lot of evidence in my hands." Zhang Cuni dared to suddenly make trouble on such an occasion. He must have ironclad evidence in his hands. Otherwise, he would never dare to make trouble like this. No wonder he dared to say that he could win first place. It turns out that he had prepared such a backup plan. Ding Nan looked at Zhang Cuni with disdain. She sneered and said, even if he gets what he wants, is he sure to win first place? Zheng Yuan sneered and said, Zhang Cuni has the Sanhuang sword in his hand, and Yu Sheng has been eliminated. Now he has a great chance of winning. Hee, I have to help him again and light the fire again. After that, he stood up and said to Zhang Cuni with a smile on his face, Zhenren Zhang, you've said so much, but it's all empty talk. There's no evidence. You can't wrongly accuse a good person. I don't think Zhenren Li is such a bad person. When Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and the others heard that Zheng Yuan had stood up to speak for Li Yundong, they all opened their mouths wide in surprise and looked at each other. Wan Hongling was tongue-tied and whispered, what's this guy up to? Only Zhou Qin thought for a moment, then immediately became furious. She gritted her teeth and said, this person deserves to die. He's fanning the flames. Sure enough, Zhang Cuni glanced at Zheng Yuan and sneered. He took out a piece of paper from his bosom. With a shake of his hand, he shook the paper and said loudly, I have recorded the confessions of all the witnesses who have been victims. They are all in Dongwu City now. Do you want me to call them over for a face-to-face confrontation? The crowd suddenly burst into an uproar. Everyone believed what Zhang Cuni had said in his heart, especially when they looked at Li Yundong's table. They saw that Su Chan and the other little foxes were trembling all over and in a panic. They had a guilty look on their faces. They no longer had any doubts. They glared at Li Yundong and said loudly, Zhenren Li, you tell us what to do. Li Yundong, I didn't expect you to be such a shameless person. Zheng Yuan also said loudly to Li Yundong with a pained expression, Zhenren Li, I didn't expect you to be so unclean and do such a thing that will anger both men and gods. Although it seems to be a small evil, if small evil is not punished, what if it leads to a big evil in the future? As soon as he said this, everyone immediately responded loudly, that's right, that's right. Zhang Cuni saw that the crowd was in an uproar, and he was secretly proud of himself. He took advantage of the victory and said, Zhenren Li, do you think a big villain like you is qualified to take a Taoist treasure like ours? Do you deserve to use such a powerful magical weapon? At this time, Su Chan finally couldn't stand it anymore. She stood up, trembling all over, and her eyes were full of tears. She shouted excitedly, this has nothing to do with Yundong. I did it. It was all my idea. Don't force him. I will take responsibility for what I have done. If there is anything, I will take responsibility for it myself. Ling Yu, who was the initiator of the incident, couldn't help but stand up and say loudly, it was my idea for Su Chan. If you want to blame someone, blame me. The little foxes also stood up and said loudly, it's our fault. It has nothing to do with leader. Don't force him. Seeing so many beautiful little foxes protecting Li Yundong, some people were both surprised and envious, jealous and resentful. Some people said sarcastically, oh, they're so united. Zhenren Li, you've done a good job of protecting your disciples. Humph, nothing good has ever happened to these foxes since they entered the mortal world. Doesn't Li Yundong care about his own subordinates? Zhang Cuni laughed and said, Zhenren Li, you have a group of good disciples. I didn't expect them to sacrifice themselves to protect you. Su Chan was so excited that her whole body trembled. She said loudly, when this happened, Yundong happened to go to Dongwu City. He didn't know about it. He was afraid that I would cause trouble, so he repeatedly told me. But I still caused trouble for him. As she spoke, the little girl finally couldn't hold back her tears. Big teardrops fell down. When everyone saw such a beautiful little girl like Su Chan crying like a pear blossom in the rain, they were all speechless for a moment. It was a pitiful thing for a beauty to cry. Those who had the slightest tenderness for the fairer sex couldn't bear to blame or force her. However, Zhang Cuni sneered and said, "What's the difference between you causing trouble and him causing trouble? Even if what you said is true, if Li Yundong didn't condone you, would you have been so bold as to do such a thing? Haven't you heard that when the master is in trouble, the disciple will do it for him? But when the disciple makes a mistake, the master will also have to bear the responsibility? What's more, Li Yundong is the leader of your Fox Zen school. If this matter isn't blamed on him, then who should it be blamed on? Humph, do you think that crying can make us soft-hearted and not pursue it?" Su Daiji caused chaos in the Shang dynasty and cried bitterly before she died, but Jiang Shang didn't soften his heart. Why? Because he was enforcing justice on behalf of heaven. Zheng Yuan, who was listening to this, secretly exclaimed, "That's amazing. Those words are really amazing. Li Yundong is in trouble now." Sure enough, at this time, everyone's eyes became united against a common enemy. They all shouted, "Li Yundong, you have to give us an explanation." Su Chan also said loudly, "Don't force him. I'll give you an explanation." Li Yundong had been standing quietly in the field. At first, he was furious and clenched his fists, but at this time, he calmed down and loosened his clenched fists. He turned his head, glared at Su Chan, and shouted, "Shut up and sit down." Su Chan was startled by Li Yundong's stare and sat down subconsciously. Only then did Li Yundong turn his head and look coldly at the excited crowd. He said to Zhang Cuni, "Zhenren Zhang, what do you think I should do? Today, I will try to write 3 chapters to make up for yesterday. In addition, I will promote my Sina Weibo, /17499723342. Welcome everyone to check it out. Vote for recommendation previous page return to contents next page error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf so that you can read the latest chapters of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 494. Go to the Internet. What should we do? Zhang Cuni snorted and said to the crowd, "What should we do?" When an emotional cultivator heard this, he shouted, "What do you mean what should we do? Hand over the perpetrator and punish him severely. We must punish him severely." There was also a cultivator who said in a strange tone, "Fox spirits are evildoers. Generally, it's one thing for you to associate with evildoers, but you don't even know how to discipline them properly. Now that such a thing has happened, I think it's time for you to be the leader of the Fox Zen school." Zhou Ping of the Zhengyi school saw that there was such a great opportunity to vent her anger, so she said loudly, "There are 2 ways to choose. The first way is for you to put righteousness before family. The second way is for you to resign from the position of leader of the Fox Zen school, withdraw from the Taoist assembly, and never participate in it again." When everyone heard this, they all glanced at Zhou Ping and thought to themselves, "A woman's heart is the most vicious." That's right. Zhou Ping is really ruthless. Zhang Cuni sneered and said, "Is that all you want? What about those who are bullied and swindled? Generally, your Desanxian must be closed, and you must pay 10 times the compensation. Moreover, you must apologize to everyone publicly and swear not to associate with these evildoers again." Only then did everyone realize that Zhou Ping was not the most ruthless person. Zhang Cuni was. Zhou Ping had just vented her anger, but Zhang Cuni had cut off her source of income and slapped her in the face. Cultivators valued their reputation the most. If they lost their reputation, what was the point of becoming an immortal? At this time, everyone looked at him, wanting to see how this young cultivator would choose. Go to the Internet. At this time, Ziyuan also clenched her fists involuntarily. Her eyes widened as she looked nervously at the field. At this moment, she seemed to have returned to 10 years ago. Hadn't her master, Wang Yuanshang, fallen in love with Ao Wushuang of the Fox Zen school and eventually turned against all the sects in the cultivation world? Why was the scene from back then repeating itself now? Back then, those people had forced her master like this. Why were they forcing him now? Why were things so shockingly similar? Zi Yuan's heart was in a mess. This fairy, who was usually calm and collected, was in a mess. She couldn't help but think, back then, for Ao Wushuang, master didn't hesitate to leave the sect and turn against the cultivation world. Li Yundong, what will he do? Li Yundong listened to the words of Zhou Ping and Zhang Cuni expressionlessly. After they finished speaking, he was silent for a while and suddenly laughed softly. Then his laughter slowly grew louder, as if disdain and ridicule were brewing in his throat. Gradually, his laughter became louder and louder, as if the thunderclouds in the ninth heaven were rolling, rumbling, shaking the teacups on the table, and rippling the tea. Zhang Cuni could hear the mockery in Li Yundong's laughter. He shouted angrily, Li Yundong, what are you laughing at? Could it be that you are so arrogant that you think you can make an enemy out of all the cultivation sects in the world? Li Yundong laughed loudly. Without looking at Zhang Cuni, he said to the crowd, does everyone have the same opinion? Everyone looked at each other for a moment. Most of the cultivators didn't want such a powerful newcomer like Li Yundong to appear and steal the limelight of the various sects, so they all agreed loudly. Du Fei, Wei Qing, and the others, who sympathized with Li Yundong, didn't dare to force themselves to stand up because the situation was one-sided against Li Yundong, so they also chose to remain silent. Seeing that everyone was adding insult to injury, Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh wildly. His laughter was even more arrogant than before. Everyone was irritated by Li Yundong's laughter. Someone shouted, Li Yundong, why are you so arrogant? Do you think you are invincible in the world? Li Yundong laughed and said, I'm not laughing for anything else. I'm just laughing at how naive you are. Do you think you can force me to obediently obey you with these words? When everyone heard this, they were furious. Some of them stood up and pointed at Li Yundong, cursing loudly. Some of the more mature ones were also angry. They frowned and stared at Li Yundong. Li Yundong acted as if he hadn't heard their words or seen their threatening eyes. He looked at Zhang Cuni coldly and said, Zhenren Zhang, I already know what you said. I also believe that what you said is true. Since someone in my sect has made a mistake, I will go back and punish them myself. It's not up to you to tell me what to do. This is a private matter of my Fox Zen school. What right do you have to decide what I should and shouldn't do here? After that, Li Yundong pointed to Su Chan, Ling Yu, and the other little foxes and said, I will take responsibility for the mistakes they made because I am their leader. I will definitely pay for what needs to be paid, but I will never close the tea house. I will definitely apologize, but I will definitely not apologize to you, but to the victims. As for the Taoist assembly, Humph, don't you just want me to withdraw from the Taoist assembly? Well, I won't fight for the immortal pen. I'll let you fight for it. Li Yundong looked at the crowd with a sneer and said, Are you satisfied now? Everyone looked at each other. Some of them with ulterior motives saw that their purpose of making Li Yundong withdraw from the competition had been achieved, so they stopped making noise. On the contrary, some of them who were eager for justice said unrelentingly, Li Yundong, you are protecting your own people. Li Yundong looked coldly at the person who had spoken and said, I am. What are you going to do about it? These words made the man speechless. A cultivator who couldn't stand it any longer helped him and said, Li Yundong, you are helping the tyrant. As a cultivator, you should do justice for the heavens and punish your own people for righteousness. Hand over the culprit and let bygones be bygones. Su Chan was Li Yundong's Achilles heel, and these words touched Li Yundong's bottom line. Li Yundong suddenly flew into a rage. He glared at the man and roared, "Say that again if you have the guts." This roar was really like a clap of thunder out of nowhere. It immediately made everyone's ears buzz. Everyone felt as if there was a fierce tiger roaring angrily in front of them. The man who had spoken before was almost scared out of his wits by Li Yundong's roar. He was so shocked that his face turned pale. He muttered subconsciously, but no one heard what he said. At this time, Li Yundong's hair was standing on end in anger. His eyes were as wide as copper bells, and his bones were crackling. He was like a beast that could choose to devour people at any time. He glanced at the crowd fiercely and coldly and said in a cold voice, "Who else wants to do justice for the heavens and ask me to punish my own people for righteousness? Stand up and speak." Before this, everyone had seen Li Yundong as a quiet and modest man. Not only was he handsome, but his temperament was also elegant and scholarly. The other party had provoked him several times, but he just smiled slightly and treated it as a cool breeze blowing in his face. But at this time, Li Yundong suddenly became furious. He suddenly shook his body, as if he had turned into a giant beast. For a moment, everyone was so shocked that they subconsciously raised the Jinqi in their bodies, guarding against Li Yundong's sudden attack. They had seen Li Yundong's ability and means before. Who would dare to reach out and touch his reverse scale again when he was so angry? Do justice for the heavens and punish his own people for righteousness? Come on. As the saying goes, a rabbit bites when cornered, and a dog jumps over a wall when cornered. This was a fierce tiger. If he was cornered, who knew what terrible things he would do? At this time, when everyone saw that Li Yundong had agreed to withdraw from the Taoist assembly, they had the idea of keeping the peace. Some righteous cultivators were so shocked by Li Yundong's roar that they didn't dare to say another word. At this time, Zhang Cuni also sighed and said hypocritically, "Jinrenli, you must think that I am targeting you, but have you ever thought that you are so strong and powerful that others can't do anything to you? Those victims want to sue you, but no one dares to accept it. But have you ever thought that if you are so angry now, those who have been bullied by you and your disciples will be angry?" Li Yundong looked at Zhang Cuni coldly and said, "Jinren Zhang, what other wise ideas do you have? You might as well say them all at once. Don't pretend to be sincere." Zhang Cuni's heart trembled under Li Yundong's gaze. He snorted and said, "I don't have any wise ideas. I'm just saying what I think. Jinrenli, since you have agreed to withdraw from the Taoist assembly, please sit down in your seat. I hope that from now on, you will restrain your disciples. Otherwise, although the world is big, there will be no place for your Fox Zen school." Li Yundong took a deep look at Zhang Cuni and didn't say anything else. He turned around and walked to his table and sat down. At this time, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and Ruan Hongling at the table all looked at Li Yundong with a complicated and inexplicable look. They admired Li Yundong because he was indeed a man with a sense of responsibility. He had carried everything on himself, but they sighed because Li Yundong must have offended most of the cultivation sects in the world by doing so. When the little girl saw Li Yundong sit down, she couldn't help looking at him with tears in her eyes. Her eyes were full of fear. She couldn't help saying in a trembling voice, "I'm sorry, leader. I've caused you trouble again. I didn't want to." When Li Yundong saw the little girl crying like a pear blossom in the rain, his anger dissipated completely. He reached out under the table and gently grabbed her hand, saying softly, "I know. You want to prove yourself, don't you? It's actually my fault. I shouldn't have put so much pressure on you. Don't cry. We didn't do it well this time. Let's learn from our experience and do it well next time. Won't that be fine?" Su Chan had always felt a lot of pressure in her heart, especially in the face of Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan, who could help Li Yundong. She had been worried all day that she would drag Li Yundong down, so she had been thinking about helping Li Yundong and proving herself. But in the end, she was still a hindrance. When the little girl heard Zhang Cuni's sudden attack, she really felt like the end of the world was coming, as if the sky had collapsed. What made Su Chan the most anxious was that she was afraid that Li Yundong would abandon her in a fit of rage and no longer want her. But at this time, after hearing Li Yundong's words, she realized how much Li Yundong loved her and how superfluous her thinking was. When Su Chan heard Li Yundong's calm words, she couldn't help crying out loud. The little girl choked and said, "But Sister Zhou Qin beat you so hard that you couldn't get the immortal pen, but I always helped you and made you unable to get the immortal pen. I'm really useless." Li Yundong smiled gently. He reached out his hand and stroked the little girl's cheek lovingly. "Silly girl. Didn't I say it before? How can a dead thing replace a living thing? How can the immortal pen be compared to you? Besides, if I were still the poor boy I used to be, would you still want me?" Su Chan looked at him with tears in her eyes and nodded. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Look, isn't that right? Back then, you liked me because I was good to you, not because I was rich or not, or because I was capable or not. I liked you back then because you were innocent and naive, and because you never despised me. So, even if you break the sky, as long as you are still the innocent, lovely, kind, and simple little girl, I will help you mend the sky. When you love someone, you can't ask the other party to change just because you have changed. Since I love you back then, I have to accept all your advantages and disadvantages. You don't have to think about changing, and you don't have to change, because I love you." Su Chan was moved, and tears kept falling. She choked and said, "I know, I won't hold you back anymore." Li Yundong laughed and reached out to help the little girl wipe the tears on her face. He smiled and said, "Don't cry. There are so many people watching here. How embarrassing." Su Chan reached out and kept wiping her tears. She wanted to smile, but more tears flowed out. She wiped her tears and said with a smile, "What if I can't control it? I just want to cry. What should I do?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Then come to my arms and cry." Su Chan finally couldn't help it. She threw herself into Li Yundong's arms and cried bitterly. "Yundong, why are you so good to me?" Li Yundong stroked the little girl's soft black hair lovingly and said softly, "Silly girl, if I don't treat you well, who should I treat well?" The two of them talked intimately as if there was no one else around. For a moment, everyone in the small building heard them clearly. They all sat there in a daze, unable to speak for a long time. Everyone's eyes were fixed on this intimate pair. They were snuggled up to each other, as if no one could separate them even if the heavens and earth were to fall apart. Today's first update, second update. I don't know when I'll be able to update it, but in my current situation. Don't wait. It's possible that I'll have to update it tomorrow morning. 8. Let's go. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.